said, New Zealand has become a fat little lapdog to Japan. And I believed at the time it was the case. Our government did nothing to try and stop Japanese whaling. And I thought I was a dead man. I seriously thought I was a dead man. You stand up for things enough and you're going to piss off a few people or piss off some powerful entities that make a lot of money out of, let's say, oil. In Japan, I remember a journalist came in one day and she said, congratulations, Captain Bethune, you're the most hated man in Japan right now. When I got to prison, I was treated like Hannibal Lecter. So my security detail was 100 men and 3 buses. They portrayed me as a common criminal, you know, and some of the media in New Zealand I thought was a bit unfair to me. Guys like Leighton Smith and that took a crack at me. I remember Marcus Lush called me Pete Buffoon. And the last thing you want to do is have your daughter embarrassed about you. You do 5 months in prison in Japan, you come out a different person. I made my best call at the time. But on this day, I betrayed a lot of people.
Oh, good, you're here. Come on. This is the centre of performance. Whenever there's a top performance in New Zealand, it all comes from here. That's Lisa Carrington. She's been doing that for days. That's the boy who got the hole-in-one in Taupo. Oh, he did it again. Hey, Finn, how's the performance going?
Top tier.
Nice. This is our Generate room. In here, you'll find our top performers helping Kiwis maximise their KiwiSaver investments. Get in here, Finn. Maximise. Right, Generate. Putting performance first.
Captain Pete James Bethune, welcome to my podcast.
It's good to be here, Dom. I'm surprised I slipped through the net with all the big names you have coming on here.
What are you on about?
Tim Morrison and all of. In fact, I started watching your podcast a couple of months ago when we teed this thing up. I was like, oh, he's got all these stars coming on here. What's this little wee conservation bloke slipping through the net? But I'm happy to be here, mate.
No, this is not. And you said a couple of months ago, but the reality is I reached out to you maybe 9 months, 10 months ago, and this has been in the diary. This has been the longest booking out of any guest for the podcast.
Yeah, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't know who Dom Harvey was. I thought, who's this clown, Dom Harvey? So, he's done quite well. You were quite a runner in your day, weren't you?
I just enjoy it, but I was never fast or good or anything. But this is an honour, mate, and we're recording this just to timestamp it, 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning. You flew into the country 5 a.m. You've only been on NZ soil for 4 hours. Where did you come from?
We just finished patrols a short time ago in Costa Rica. So to back that up, my work in Costa Rica and Panama, we have a former Navy ship and we help with fisheries enforcement in Panama and Costa Rica, and then we do jungle patrols in Costa Rica and a couple of their big jungle national parks. We've got a tracking dog which will track and hold people, and just Costa Rica, LA, and back to here. So, but good to be here.
Jungle patrol, what does that mean?
So Costa Rica has a big problem with illegal mining and wildlife poaching, and Costa Rica has quite forward thinking. They have banned all hunting of fauna on land in Costa Rica. There's not a single animal on land you're allowed to hunt in Costa Rica. But historically, people have been used to hunting tapir and pigs and peccary, different types of deer. But the problem with that is a lot of those animals are food for jaguar and puma. And so they started to see their jaguar population plummeting because of all the poaching. And Costa Rica, like here, it's an expanding population has caused problems. So there's a lot of wildlife poaching happens, and so we're trying to stop those guys. And then more recently, a lot of illegal gold mining. And mining is legal in some parts of Costa Rica, but not in the national parks. And those guys are a bit easier to catch because there's a signature. When they start mining, the water becomes turbid where they're working. And so we'll work our way up riverbeds and creek beds and just looking for turbid water. And that normally indicates that mining is happening up there. And I should preface that it's all done in conjunction with park rangers. The park rangers are, I would say, relatively poor organisation in Costa Rica, low funding, partly because healthcare and education is a real priority in Costa Rica. So the park rangers are like these poor cousins, and so we support them with manpower and tracking dog and boats for the fisheries and stuff.
So you're basically just going around making citizens' arrests?
No, they're not citizens arrest because we always have the park rangers with us, and they have jurisdiction to arrest people, to seize the boat. We will advise them, because different park rangers, they might only do 2 or 3 fishery patrols in their region, and then we're in the next one with a new set and a new set and a new set. So we've become real experts, especially on the fishery side. But it's the park rangers who always have jurisdiction to arrest and seize the boat and whatever, and we facilitate those operations.
This is going to be a hell of a chat. You may be the most interesting person that's ever come from Hamilton.
I think that's a bit unfair on Harold and Dom.
No, okay. Well, I've got some Pete Bethune fun facts here, just to sort of set the scene of the person we're dealing with on the podcast today. He's a world record holder. Spent 5 months in a Japanese jail, staring down the barrel of a potential 10-year sentence. Been a guest on the iconic Jay Leno show in America. Produced a TV show called The Operatives that's been broadcast in 90 countries. 2017, attacked and stabbed in the Amazon with a large rusty knife. Met Gaddafi in Libya. Shot at in Central America. Found the corpse of a man killed by a tiger and carried him out of a jungle. Are these all?
That one's not true. They carried the tiger out of the jungle. That was not true. Okay. I don't know where that one came from, but so I haven't done that, I'm afraid.
You've water cannoned. You've flown on the Concorde. Bitten by a poisonous snake in Costa Rica in 2020, and at the time described your testicles as black, soft, and mushy. This is what we're dealing with here. You're 60. You're looking great for 60, by the way, but you've crammed 100 lives into 60 years.
I tell you, I was talking with a guy the other day. In a year of my life, I probably lived more adventure than a lot of people in a lifetime.
Yes.
And, I consider myself super blessed that I've managed to sort of move my life in a way that allows me to have adventure and genuine purpose. You mentioned before I gave a TED talk a while ago, and the focus of it was the people that lead the greatest lives that I respect. There's purpose in what they do, and I've been lucky. I found mine. It's saving wildlife, and around that is this roller coaster of adventure. My life at the moment, there's the highs are really, really high, and then the lows are pretty low. But this more than balances out this side, and I'm very blessed to pursue what I do, and I've found a great niche for myself and my team in Costa Rica and Panama, but there have been a few lows along the way. I'll tell you something. There's a guy in Costa Rica who mentors me. His name's Tom Olivo, and he's focuses on. He's got psychoanalysis of something like 30,000 people. And a lot of CEOs, a lot of elite athletes. He came and did an analysis of me, and he mentors me in some ways. And he said, I don't necessarily agree with this, but he said, if you put 50,000 people in a stadium, there would be one other person with the same propensity for risk that I have. But he said, the unusual thing in me is that he said it's super calculated. And so my background is in engineering. And when I look at certain patrols, I'm always trying to look at how can we reduce the risk or make it less likely that I come out, injured, or one of my crew ends up in a body bag or something. So there's a certain amount of calculation. And the example he gave of this, he'd watch me. We put on a fundraiser in Costa Rica in December each year, and the last one we had 300 people. We raised about $15,000 on this fundraiser, but it's a great big piss up. We have 5 DJs. We've got a guy from the Crystal Method, which is a very famous rave DJ duo. We have him, 5 DJs. I built a cage for cage dancers, and we have mermaids and all sorts of fire dancers. Anyway, so I built this cage for mermaids, but the floor.
You didn't poach the mermaids?
No. The mermaids came voluntarily. The interesting thing with Costa Rica, it's a real melting pot in the OSA of conservation people, spiritual people, a few people escaping the law in America. It's a real melting pot of different people, but and there's no real big party for in that part of the world. So we put on this networking opportunity for environmental people, and then there's all these other vagabonds that are coming around it. And at the party anyway, so I set up this cage dancer. I had my fiancée, she was one of the cage dancers, got up there in skimpy outfits and moved around. But I was worried about the bolts that were holding the base of it in. So I've taken some MDMA and I'm wandering around this cage, checking on the bolts, not just because my fiancée was in there, but wondering that I hope those bolts all hold, because when the time I put it together it was a rush. But anyway, the bolts, I checked them all, went round with them a torch, and they were all okay. And then I went back. I did a set DJing at it. I've never DJ'd before. It was a great exercise for me to learning how to mix. My DJing, I wouldn't say it's very professional, but I can do it. I can do a good transition. So I just sit there concentrating with the next transition, line roll up, and away I go. But it was a great exercise. I mean, through my life, I've been very quick to try and learn new things. So, for example, we've got a big military drone, $4 million drone, went to Austria for 5 months to learn how to fly this very sophisticated drone. And you're effectively logging in with civil aviation and flying it in civil airspace and things. I've always been good at here's something that's interesting to me. I'll go and pursue that. Learned how to do a canine tracking. And, I used to hunt pigs when I was a kid with dogs. I would be a much better pig hunter now, understanding how their nose actually works. So, Anyway, back to that. Apparently my risk propensity is quite high, but I've always seen it as very calculated, and I do try and reduce those risks in what we do.
When have you been most scared?
That's a good question.
So one of those occasions that I mentioned, like when once you've been bitten by a venomous snake, or once you've been stabbed, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, so we got bitten by, the local name is Terciopello. It's a fer de lance, which is the second most deadly snake in the world, only behind the black mamba. And extremely high death rate in Costa Rica because there's a large number of them. So we were doing a patrol, got bitten by this snake, and I knew it was a terciopello as soon as I saw it. We'd seen maybe a dozen of them. They're quite prevalent in Corcovado, and I knew it was a terciopello. And there was a story had done the rounds. A park ranger 2 years earlier got bitten by the same type of snake. He was dead in 10 minutes, and we had 3 hours to go to hike or crawl, whatever, down to get a Coast Guard boat to come take me to hospital. And I thought I was a dead man. I seriously thought I was a dead man because it was quite steep canyons that we had to go down. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm probably okay with this. Like, I've led an extraordinary life. I've been super lucky in what I've done. And you're a very privileged position to think, this could be my last day on Earth and I'm okay with it. And after that, it was a little bit of a wake-up call for me too. I'd become a bit blasé in the jungle patrols. There are risks there with snakes, and also quite a few of the guys in the jungle that were chasing our arms, sort of thing. So it was a sort of wake-up call. And my daughters have a thing. They say, I've got 9 lives. That was my 7th one that I've used up. And so my daughter's like, Dad, you've got to stop doing this. But I wouldn't swap it. I mentioned before, I'm so lucky to do what I do. My work has genuine value in Costa Rica and Panama. The world is a fractionally better place with me in it. And so the fact is there's risks that come from this. And the fact that I'm a white boy from New Zealand doesn't give me a free pass. The rangers are exposed to this all the time. And, if I want to go and participate with the rangers and help them catch illegal miners or illegal fishermen, there's risks that come from that.
Yeah, you're a dad of two adult daughters now. I've got a quote here from Danielle.
Okay.
Every time I say goodbye to him, I'm conscious that it may be the last.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that... I'm not a dad myself, but if I'm in your position, that would probably feel like a bit of a punch in the gut to me, in a way.
My daughter wrote that. My daughter's... Her English at 15 was better than mine. She's a great writer. And she wrote that after... I think it was after I got stabbed in Brazil. And she wrote that thing. And she said in it... I remember when I was in prison in Japan, they portrayed me as a common criminal, and some of the media in New Zealand I thought was a bit unfair to me. Guys like Leighton Smith and that took a crack at me. I remember Marcus Lush called me Pete Bethune and things like that. And so Danny took a bit of stick at school. And the last thing you want to do is have your daughter embarrassed about you. And I think Danny especially, I don't think it helped her having her dad portrayed as a common criminal. And last thing as a dad you want to be is your daughter's being slightly embarrassed. And then, when she wrote that article, part of that article, she said she's super proud of me and what I do. And, that's a good position to be. If your kids are proud of you, that's where you want to be in life. Your last thing you want to be is have your kids embarrassed about their dad. So, it's been one of the great journeys of my life, seeing my 2 daughters become their own people and carve their own path. And I catch up with Danny tomorrow, actually. We're going to Coromandel to spend a bit of time there.
One of the most memorable quotes I think I've had on the podcast is from the great Grant Fox. And his saying is, how do you spell love to your kids? And it's T-I-M-E, time. But with what you've done, like, it requires a huge amount of time away from home. So there's things that you've missed in this pursuit of making the world a slightly better place, as you put it. Yeah. How do you reflect on that?
I married a great lady. Like Sharon, we were married for something like 20 years, and she did an amazing job raising my kids. We're divorced now, and I'm engaged to another great lady. But I largely attribute the success of my kids coming out the way they have to my wife. She was and I was off setting records around the world, and then chasing poachers and illegal miners and breaking into diamond mines. And so, my time with my kids was not that great when I was young. But I remember one day sort of thinking about, it was when I was looking to go to Antarctica to try and stop Japanese whaling. And I need to do more with my life than just raise two great daughters. And I was conscious, Sharon and her family are doing an amazing job with my daughters. There is sufficient here for me to go and try and stop Japanese whaling. And after that, there was other things that I pursued. Now it's not an issue, once your kids are 29 and 30. As long as I catch up with them a couple of times a year, I'm happy with that.
It's more than enough.
Yeah. But, it was, I do credit Sharon. She's an amazing lady, and she did such an awesome job of raising our two daughters while I was off, trying to make the world a better place.
You mentioned before some of the criticism, and it obviously stung because it was a long time ago, and you still remember the names like Marcus Larsh and Leighton Smith. And you don't have to scroll deep into comment sections of articles to find things like Captain Bethune or Clown, Idiot. When people say these things about you, what point are they missing? What are they getting wrong?
It's easier when you go following media to get sucked into the people that don't like you and look at their comments. If you put your head up far enough, there's always some people who'll come in and take a crack at you. Even you look at some of the All Blacks. They have a bad day, and next thing everyone's attacking them online. It's become more prevalent in recent times of social media and Facebook and Instagram and stuff, where people are very quick to go criticising. And in my case, the people that are critical of me, I try to just ignore it. It does impact me a little bit. If I get, for a period of time I was getting quite a few death threats. I had an awkward breakup with Sea Shepherd. I also had a lot of Japanese hated me. In Japan, I remember a journalist came in one day and she said, "Congratulations, Captain Bethune, you're the most hated man in Japan right now." And, there was significant protests out. Every time I had a day in court in Japan, there was 500 people outside protesting me. And I remember in the court case itself, on one of the days, and prior to that, people had kind of liked me. When I set a record for a boat to go around the world running biodiesel, it was mostly positive. We didn't really have any enemies. When I went over to Sea Shepherd, that definitely shifted. And Sea Shepherd does polarise people. Some people are quite supportive of it, but there's a core group of people who say, "Oh, it's illegal what you guys are doing," and prop fouling and all the rest of it. So I generated some enemies with Sea Shepherd, and then I generated some political enemies. I remember I came out of Japan, and I gave a quote where I said, "New Zealand has become a fat little lapdog to Japan." And I believed at the time it was the case. Like our government did nothing to try and stop Japanese whaling.
This is when John Key was Prime Minister.
Yeah, exactly that. John Key, his government was reasonably sort of right wing, and he tried to make out they'd done a great deal of work supporting me. There was no support from New Zealand. They sent the ambassador in to meet me once, and they sent a guy to keep an eye on each time there was a court case. One guy went in, but I didn't need their help. What I needed them to do was to take Japan to the International Court of Justice. And interestingly,
they're not going to do that.
Well, they didn't want to do it. And what happened was, when I was in Japan, there was a protest with something like 10,000 people in Sydney over whaling. So there was the ramming from a boat. I was in prison in Japan, and it's one of the few times that Greenpeace, WWF, Sea Shepherd all kind of got together, and there was a big protest in Sydney, and the Australian government, while I was in prison in Japan, announced court action against Japan in the International Court of Justice. That court case took 4 years to reach its fruition. Japan lost the case, and they stopped whaling in Antarctica. There's no coincidence that announcement was made while I was in Japan. There's very few people could say they've done something in terms of conservation. I was a key player in stopping Japanese whaling. Back to New Zealand. New Zealand begrudgingly a year and a half later announced, we will join Australia's side. And so in the final court case, New Zealand presented evidence in addition to Australia. And it was wrong what the Japanese were doing. Everyone knew it was wrong. It wasn't science. You don't need to kill 1,000 whales a year to figure out how many are giving birth to babies kind of thing.
Not very good scientists if that's the case.
It raises a case where, as activists, your job is to raise the profile of something, obviously, And, with Japanese whaling, our job was to get enough public opinion against Japanese whaling that a government would stand up. And it was the Australian government that did. And that comment, New Zealand's become a fat little lapdog to Japan, didn't go very well with John Key. So when you take on powerful allies like that, then, he's got a big media machine, and next thing, there's a whole, they've done a press release about me, and John Key's given an interview, and, next thing Pete Bethune's getting a bunch of, I didn't get much in the way of death threats out of New Zealand. Those are mostly elsewhere, but I got a lot of people having a go at me, and it comes from standing up for things.
Yeah.
You stand up for things enough, and you're going to piss off a few people or piss off some powerful entities that make a lot of money out of, let's say, oil. I was promoting biodiesel and renewable fuels. Effectively you're taking on the oil industry, and they've got very powerful lobbyists on their side.
Yeah, deep pockets.
Deep pockets, indeed.
Yeah, just talking about the online trolling thing that you're saying before. Yeah, I got a theory that if you don't want anyone to criticise you online, there's a way to do it, and it's just don't say anything and don't do anything.
Cream on cream, cream on. You can be so bland that if you I think for you to stand up on a principle out something, there'll always be some people on the other side that are going to have a go at you, and it's the nature of the beast. You've probably got a couple of guys starting to have a go at you soon too.
Oh, it happens. But even on a far smaller scale, like say you live in a little neighbourhood and you decide you're going to do something with your life, like an Ironman or a marathon, you'll get people in the neighbourhood saying, oh, you can't do it, or having a go at you. It happens. The only way through is cream on cream, as you say. Geez, there's a lot of breadcrumbs already, which sort of paints a picture of the man we're dealing with here. I want to go all the way back and sort of maybe work through some of this in a chronological order. The issue with someone like you, Captain Pete, is working out what to include and what to leave out, because there's so many strands to your story. But April 4, 1965, born in Hamilton.
It was a small town back then. We had our house backed onto the railway tracks. And as kids, Mum was studying law, and then she was a legal executive full time, and Dad was off, usually away. And so we were largely unrestrained as kids. We'd go down the railway lines, and I mean, one time we would build tree huts in this big tree. And one year we were like, fuck, let's chop the tree down. Yeah. So we chopped this tree down. It falls over the railway lines. And then, next thing there's, someone reported to the council, and they come in and tow it away. We went rafting down the Waikato River with, just told our people, got some baked beans and peaches, and see you later, Dad. We're going rafting down the Waikato River, left a note for them and rafted down the river. We were very adventurous kids. Hamilton was a great place back then for raising kids. Like Hamilton Lake, we'd go up there and catch all sorts of catfish and perch and eels and catching possums, and then we kind of evolved. We had a super privilege. We had an amazing dad.
Don.
Yeah, Don Bethune. He was an amazing man. At the time, we never really valued him. It was only later on in life that I started to realise what an amazing man he was in terms of raising great kids. He never liked hunting, but he would take us hunting when we wanted. We were the wealthiest kids in school by hunting possums. So he would take us out on a Friday night. We would shoot out the window of his car. So we would have Baz out one window, me out the other window with the gun. Or
Baz, by the way, your twin brother?
Baz is my twin brother, yeah.
10 minutes older or younger than you?
He's 10 minutes younger. Yeah. So anyway, Dad had a company car. He worked for a pharmaceutical company as a medical rep. So he got free car, free petrol. We would drive all round Raglan and up over to Tauranga. We'd drive a lot of golf courses. We'd hunt possums on the golf course, call them up, say, hey, we want to come and shoot possums. They didn't like the possums because they'd go shitting on the greens or whatever. We were the wealthiest kids in school from shooting possums. A big night, we would get 50 possums. We averaged $5 a pelt. So we'd make, keep in mind, this is like 55 years ago, we would make $250 in a good night. A lot of work. You shoot 50 possums, we could only fit about 30 of them in the boot. We'd have to go back next day to pick the rest of them up. And then we'd spend the entire weekend skinning these possums, pegging them out, and then we had a little drying room with a kerosene thing that we would heat up this little room in the garage and dry them out. And then we'd go to Berg's Game Co. out by Martangi, and we would take our pelts, and there was a guy turned up there once every 6 weeks to take the pelts. And one time I ended up had a teacher, Kevin Watkins, who was I was fortunate. I never cared about school until Standard 4, and I got a teacher came in, Kevin Watkins, and on the first day of school, he kind of took me under his wing. In fact, what he did, he turned up with scuba gear. And he said, right, I need a kid to volunteer to go into the pool with scuba gear. And so everyone puts their hand up, and he picked me. I get in the scuba gear and I do 2 laps under the pool. Probably illegal now. You probably couldn't do that with a 10-year-old kid. But anyway, I did 2 laps of the pool. Excuse me. After that, he took me under his wing, and he took me aside on day 2, and he said, I think you're a lot cleverer than what I see in your reports. He said, I want you to work hard for me. And he gave me a few goals to do. It was the first time I'd ever cared about school. Baz and I got held back a year because we were supposedly dumb. We weren't dumb, we were just naughty. And then the following year I went to Melville Intermediate. I had the same teacher again. He shifted schools. I don't know if he made a request to have me in his class, and I got top in the class. And from there, my twin brother at the same time had 3 female teachers. The following year I had this teacher, Kevin Watkins. So I had 3 years of great male teachers who instilled in me a work ethic in terms of studying. My brother never got that. Not to say my life is any better or worse than his, but as soon as he was able to leave school, he left. I carried on, went to university. Anyway, to back it up, Kevin Watkins was my teacher. He agreed for us to go possum shooting at his farm, right? He had a farm out by Taupiti. We go out there, and there was this possum that had kind of greeny blue eyes, which is very rare for a possum, and it was black. And black possums we'd get the most. A good black or dark brown pelt, we'd get $25 for it. So anyway, so we shot this thing, and but it was across the other side of this creek. And we're like, oh, bugger it, we'll come back the next day and get it. We turn up the next day, it's a cat. We take this thing out, and it's got a little bell on it. It's got a wee thing with Fluffy written on the tab, right? So we put it in with it. We were staying in the barn at my teacher's farm. So we go back to the barn, and we're like, and there's a saying, there's many ways to skin a cat. There actually is. You can skin it. Same with a possum. There's a lot of ways to skin a possum. Anyway, so what we did was we skinned this cat, and went up with the skin. It was quite small. It was quite little, but it sort of looked possumish. So then we turn up at the Bergs Game Company, right? We turn up there, and we were the only kids there. It's all these old gnarly 60-year-old men, with 500 pelts that were trapping, and we turn up with our 50 or 100 pelts or whatever, and the Bergs guy says, "What the fuck's this?" "It's a possum, sir." "It's a fucking cat. It's a cat," and it's all the old Diggses coming around, looking at this pelt of a cat.
Wait, what did you want to do then? What did you want to do with your life? As a primary school, intermediate, early years of high school?
I didn't know really. Dad had visions of me being a doctor. I don't think I was clever enough to be a doctor, but he talked me into taking Latin at school. So I took 3 years of Latin that has never been useful in any way whatsoever. I didn't really know. I remember in my 7th form, I thought I would join the Air Force, and there was talk of it being free. They would pay you through university while everyone else is on the bones of their bum. So for a period of time, I wanted to be in the Air Force, and then they rejected me, and I thought I'd get in. I went through the initial 2 interviews, and I nailed it. And I was thinking, I'm made for this. And then I got rejected when they came back and said, because of the asthma, we can't take Pete. And I got on my motorbike, and I went out bush for 3 weeks out in Pirongia. Just went up there, shot goats, caught a couple of eels. I didn't take enough food with me, just took baked beans. But I remember I took it was when those little Walkmans had just come in. I was working at Food Town at the time, and I think I might have nicked a couple packs of batteries. I went out there and I had a Depeche Mode Speak and Spell album, and I had U2 War, and I spent 3 weeks in the bush trying to get my head in order, and hunting goats and chasing eels. And I came out super lean, like my body fat must have been like 3 or 4%. 3 weeks of just eating protein and nothing else. So that was it. And then it was kind of what I want to do. All my mates were going to uni. My marks were reasonable in science. I was like, bugger, I'll just go and do science. I went and did a Bachelor of Science degree in maths and physics. And
you're a smart guy. Reasonably.
I can pass exams. There's a funny story on there was my final year of my Bachelor of Science. I had a paper, computer systems. There was me and my best mate, Mike Visser, at the time. On the first assignment, we just flagged it away and said, the day it's due in, we went up, and it was too late. We couldn't get our username and password to log into our account. So we went in, we got a coat hanger, and we fished in and fished out someone else's assignment. In those days, you handed in a cubby hole. We fished out this other one, so we've got this thing, and it's an executable program that it's got your username at the top, or it was your ID number, and then there's this program, and it goes through and executes, and at the bottom it looks like it's all done. So but we couldn't log into our account to do this because we didn't have our password, and now the office is closed. So overnight, I said, we'll just create a text file, so it looks like that. So we sat there the entire night creating, if you like, this image that makes it look like we've gone and done this code properly, right? So we hand that in. We do that for the rest of the year. Right through the year, we just cheated each one, copied a thing, and there was no test. All it was these things. And then the final, when it comes to the exam, I'd had some very difficult quantum mechanics, classical physics, and some maths papers, all super hard. So I'm spending all my time on this thing, and this computer systems will be a doddle. And then I've got 2 days left to study for computer systems. First day, studying away, I do a mock exam, and I'm thinking, man, I'd be lucky to get 5%. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, man, I need at least 4 or 5 days to pass this exam. Mike calls me up, he's in the same boat. So we get together, and he's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't want to fail it. I think I might injure myself. And so I went to the pub in the afternoon, and most of my mates had already finished uni, so they were all at the pub having a beer. I go home and I sliced my thumb open with a box cutter. So that's the scar there.
Oh!
And so I sliced it open. I got in my car. I had an automatic Holden that I'd put a V8 in. So I drive up to the hospital. The doctor sews it up, and then I'm about to leave. And he says, oh, anything else I can help with? I said, yeah, I need a letter saying I can't sit in my exam tomorrow. So he writes me a letter. And so that got me out of the exam. They end up giving me a conceded pass, which, like you sort of pass. Poor old Mike failed. He had to go back for another year just to do one paper.
Were you a worry for your parents growing up?
Yeah, I think so. The police come round a few times.
What for? Or shooting out of car windows?
No, we always got away with that, eh? Dad was pretty clever. We had a few times. There was one time out by Raglan, and we'd shot this possum. It was in a tree right above this house. So we shoot this possum. It's in a farmhouse, but it's in the front yard. We go running out there, and the farmer comes running out. It was quite late. It was like 2 a.m. or so. This farmer comes running out, and what are you? Takes the number plate of Dad's car, but Dad's sort of trying to calm him down. But no, we never got in trouble. We used to hunt. The road going over to Tauranga. We hunted on that road. We would spotlight. Roads were great because you cover a large distance. And you'd drive along at about 20, 30 k's. In those days, at 1 o'clock in the morning, there was barely a car. And if there was a car coming, Dad would just pull over the side of the road, and then we'd sort of hide down inside. And as soon as the car was parked, we'd be back up and spotlighting. Those possum days were great for, I think, work ethic. Like for you to go and hunt 50 possums a night, that was exciting stuff. We liked the hunting side, but we didn't like the pegging them out, and that was where the real work was. And when you're 10 years old and skinning possums, it's much more suited to 25-year-olds with strong fingers. And so it was hard work for us, but it was a great lesson about there's rewards that come from hard work. In fact, it's a lesson these days on my ship, I have at any one time, there's typically around 8 to 10 volunteers on my ship. And I notice with a lot of the kids that I get on especially, there's a real lack of discipline. And a lot of kids these days don't get much in the way of lessons in terms of hard work. I was lucky that both Baz and I got that as young kids from possum shooting, and that led into greater adventures. We started doing hunting. Something like if you go hunting pigs, for example, you carry a 200-pound pig out of the bush. That is hard work. But there's rewards that come from that in terms of, when I was a student, we ate better than any other students at university because we had a supply of pigs and deer and occasionally goats and stuff like that. And just going back to those kids that I get on the boat, I try and teach them one of the lessons that I think is most valuable, I think, is that you largely get rewarded in life for the problems you solve. And if the greatest problem you solve is flipping burgers at a McDonald's, you're not going to get that rewarded. It's not to denigrate people who are happy with that. There's plenty of people who are quite happy just flipping burgers. It's a very low-stress life. But I would suggest they're missing out on those highs. There was a quote I heard from someone a while ago, and they said, when you look at someone very successful, people are jealous of the things that they may have. They're not jealous of the journey that you went on to get there. But the journey's where the rewards are. It's like with when I look at the things that I'd be most proud of in my life, and you could say one of them would be we were the first people to expose the seal clubbing in Namibia. No one knew it was happening at the time, and we broke into a De Beers diamond mine, extremely high risk, and spent 4 days dodging these patrols, and eventually we managed to film the seal clubbing. And it was the first time the world woke up, holy cow, these people are clubbing seals. And but the journey we went on was hard. We got dropped off a kilometre offshore, swimming ashore in one of only 2 places in the world where great whites breach chasing seals. We're in a seal rookery, dressed like seals, swimming through the thing. And that journey was extremely hard. The point I make is that often people shy away from those hard journeys, but that's where the reward comes from. And that's how you kind of grow as a person and evolve to be better at solving problems. Very often I look at my life, the things I'm proudest of are the biggest problems I solved, like stopping whaling in Antarctica. I don't claim it for myself. There were some great teams that worked on that, but I was a key player in making that happen. That's pretty fucking cool. I can say I genuinely helped stop whaling in Antarctica, but the journey to get there is not so easy. You do 5 months in prison in Japan, you come out a different person, And so anyway, backing that up, a lot of my work today, I've got a lot of very, very cool young kids that come on my ship. And one of the lessons I give them is you want to become good at solving problems. And if you get good at it, or you get in a team that is really good at it and you contribute, that's where the reward is. And you will become much better at solving problems, and that allows you to solve bigger problems.
You're incredibly rich in experiences. Are you financially rich? Or, you're not materialistic at all, eh?
No. In fact, I was at a period when I left school. I got a job in a company called Schlumberger. We were the highest paid guys on an oil rig. I would clear $250,000 a year. Keep in mind
this is in your mid-20s, right? Mid to late 20s.
Yeah, like 23 to 30 odd. So I'd clear $250,000 US a year, with probably equivalent to $1 million in today's money. But I kind of got the money out of my system. In fact, the turning point for me was I came back to New Zealand on days off. So typically we would work about a year straight, where you're working maybe 6 days a week, but no genuine time off. Then you get 3 months off. I came back to New Zealand. I got to hang out with Marcel and a bunch of the guys that I went to university with. I remember thinking, man, these guys are all really cool. The engineers I were working with were boring. All they cared about was money. And, they all had Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff. And it didn't really press my buttons. And I went back to Schlumberger at the time I was working in Libya, hung out with these engineers, and I remember thinking, these guys' lives are very linear. All they got going on is fast cars and money. There was real lack of depth to them. They were good problem solvers in terms of engineers. And so I walked away from Schlumberger and I walked away from the money. And after that, I never cared about money so much. And
so you had to climb that mountain to realise it wasn't the summit you wanted to be on.
Yeah, exactly. You put that super well.
But were those years good though? Like a young
roller coaster.
Is that when you flew on the Concorde?
Yeah.
What's that like?
Oh, it was amazing. It's a small plane. Like it's only like I think 4 seats wide with an aisle down the middle. 100 people in it. So 25 rows of 2 each side, and when it takes off, it goes up super steep and incredibly loud, right? So it goes up super steep, then it gets up to I think 45,000 feet or whatever, and then it starts going horizontal. It goes faster and faster and faster. And they had, back in those days, they had a screen that would show how many Mach it was doing, and it's sort of showing Mach 0.81, 82, 83, and then as you got close to the speed of sound, the plane starts to it's going like this, and you're sort of looking around, and and the air hostesses are still serving champagne or whatever. It was all first class. There was no demarcation of economy. It was all first class. The plane's starting to shake and jiggle, whatever, and then once you got over the speed of sound, deathly quiet. Yeah. And that was... they stopped the Concorde shortly after. I think British Airways closed it down, and then Air France was the other company that was on it. So it's pretty cool to have done that. Now I think I paid $35,000-$40,000 for a ticket. Fuck, I wouldn't spend my money like that anymore.
What did you blow that money on? Did you blow the money on anything cool? Being a guy in your 20s earning that sort of money?
Hired a Lamborghini Countach in London, and they gave us, our vacation allowance a year was $25,000. And so in today's money, it's $100,000, but you only got days off once a year. So you had 25 extra grand to go and blow on whatever, but it could only go on travel and accommodation. I spent $30,000 on a ski weekend in Switzerland, stayed in 5-star hotels, and I look back, how I, turned up and went through an airport and bought 2 gold Rolexes watches, one for me and one for my fiancée at the time. Sharon, yeah.
Why? See, for a lot of people, that would have been enough. An adventurous job by most people's standards, and really good money.
Yeah, the downside, I found that engineers were boring people, and my mates back in New Zealand, I resonated with them more. Came back, and in fact, that's right. I went hunting with Baz, and I thought, oh man, it's been ages. It's been over a year since I got to have a hunt with Barry, and I really like my hunting. And the other point with it, one of the things with Schlumberger, extremely stressful. Like the job was tough. And to give you an idea, in our training school, 25 engineers, there was only 6 of us graduated through the school, and I was the closest to being fired each time. In fact, I never went through. They had a 1-month induction where they would send you for maybe 4 to 6 weeks in a given base. I never got that, so I'm behind the 8 ball when I'm in this school in Livingston in Scotland, and these other engineers have all had 4 to 6 weeks of learning, and I've had none of that. So after 2 weeks, they fired 3 of the guys, and they would rank you every week. They ranked the engineers from the top engineer to the bottom, and I'm the very bottom. They fired 3 engineers above me. And Christian Genovan was the name of the boss at the time. He took me in his office and he said, this is the last, if you're bottom next time round, he said, you will be fired. He said, I went easy on you because I know you never had the induction process. And so I worked super hard. And in many ways, there was quite a few engineers there that were cleverer than me. They had two Oxford dons. And, Schlumberger, to put in perspective, everyone else in New Zealand coming out of engineering school is earning $30,000 to $40,000 in those days. Schlumberger, you're starting on 150. It was, and so I was desperate to get into Schlumberger, and so I worked super hard. But I had some advantages. I'd built a jet boat, I'd rebuilt several cars, I was very practical, I knew how to ring spanner and monkey wrench and all that stuff worked, whereas a lot of those engineers were very academic but lacked the practical side. And then another thing, I was quite a physical kid, and a lot of the work in Schlumberger was really, really physical. And so I made a great engineer if I could get on top of the theory. And so I worked super hard on the theory. And Schlumberger, in many ways, there was a series of technology which really put me in good stead for what followed. So we would run radioactive sources. So I'm qualified to handle both neutron and cesium gamma ray sources. They trained us in running explosives. They trained us in electromagnetism. They trained us in hydraulics, pneumatics, all sorts of things. And so the job we had was we would drop different devices down the well and evaluate the reservoir to find out how much oil is there, or it might just be water. How producible is it? How quickly will that flow? So in many ways, we were the eyes of the oil industry. We were the first guys to see oil. I remember one time I went out to a rig, I think it was a Santa Fe 135, and they took what's called a kick. So they have drilling fluid in this hole that they've drilled. They can adjust the weight of that fluid by putting in a certain amount of barite. Barite will make it heavier. This is on the same site. There was a very famous rig, the Piper Alpha, that blew up. 129 lives lost when this rig blew up. This is only half a kilometre from where that well was. They took a kick where the fluid starts flowing out. If the fluid flows out too much, then you've got gas in the pipe, and then the rig is going to blow up. So they took a kick on this well. I get sent out there to go and log the rig. and they'd increased the weight to some crazy amount. So I go down with my first tool, and I thought the tool had failed. There was so much sandstone. Sandstone is what you want. Sandstone has good porosity. And then I'm looking, I think, fuck, it's like 600 feet of pay, 600 feet of pay zone. Normally a good reservoir in UK, like 100 feet is considered good. Like I've got, and then I set a tool which would try and suck a certain amount of fluid out, and the pressure drop and then how it would come back up would show you the permeability. How easy is this oil going to flow out of this reservoir? And I thought my tool had failed again, like it just went pop, 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 up like that. So the pressure drop was just instantaneous and then back to what the formation pressure was. I was looking at this, and so I'm thinking, I think the tool might be failed, but I see there, it's super permeable. And that became one of the biggest producing fields in the North Sea, and I was the first guy to see it. And it impacted British Gas's share price. So it was a great chance to do insider trading if you want to, if you're into that, because now you've seen a big reservoir that is going to have a significant financial impact on that company. However, there's another story that I should touch on. That same well, so I left the rig. And there was a lot of pressure to get that well. I think my bill for that job was 1.5 million. I made the company 1.5 million over 3 days of logging on that well. My bonus on that was $15,000. So in 3 days of work, I got $15,000. Hard work and a lot of pressure on you to get the thing right. And I had a couple tool failures. The temperature in that well was about 300 Fahrenheit. So your electronics start burning out, things like that. Anyway, that well, I think it was about a month later, they carried on drilling, and the pay zone kept on going a bit more. I get a call to go and do what's called a back off. What had happened was they'd got the drill pipe stuck. So now that they can't pull the pipe out, they can't turn it, they can't do nothing, the pipe is stuck. So and this is a very stressful job for an engineer to do. So what I've got to do, so I go out there, I've been drinking all night. I invented a drink called the Kiwi in Aberdeen. There was a bar there called Henry J. Beans, which is where all the engineers would go and hang out. And the Schlumberger engineers, they were all quite wealthy guys. So we'd go there, we'd I'll have a Kiwi thing. So I said a Kiwi is a pint glass, 5 shots of rum topped up with Coke and a slice of orange on it. If only because I like rum and Coke. So many years later, you could still go and order a Kiwi at Henry J. Beans in Aberdeen. So now I drank 3 Kiwis, so I have an equivalent 15 shots of rum, the Scottish shots. So I'm shit-faced. I get back to my room or back to my house, and there's like 12 messages from my wife saying, "Pete Bethune, you're on a chopper at 5 o'clock in the morning. You better be there. This is like 3 o'clock, and I'm still drunk." So I get in my car, back then it was quite common, get in my car, drive to the base, get the tools ready, get the WRM, which was the manual to describe how to do a back-off. A back-off would normally only be a senior engineer. I'm only like 8 months out of graduations, and I've never done a back-off. I've never been an assistant on it. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out, how the fuck does this work? I get on the chopper. My 2 operators aren't there. So now so normally the operators who would have done these jobs before can sort of guide you on the physical side and where do we put the sheave and how do we get down inside the pipe. So I get in the chopper, halfway on the flight. It's just me on this big Super Puma chopper, just me with my tools. I chunder I grab, they have these paper bags that will sort of hold the chunder. Someone's ripped a hole in the bottom, so let's chunder down there. So, this is a disaster. I get onto the rig. The big American company man comes out, Mr. Schlumberger, he starts talking, and he sees I've tried to do my best to wipe it. And he comes in and he says, "You've been drinking, haven't you?" And I said, "Sir." I said, "Look, I only found out at 3 o'clock I was coming in today. I've done my best. I've got the tools or whatever." And he said, "Right, what do you need?" And then I remember thinking, I didn't know physically how the equipment would all be set. I knew if I got the tool down the well, I could figure it out. So I came clean. I said, "Actually, sir, I've never done one of these, and I don't quite know how this is all rigged up." And so he immediately calls to my boss, tries getting another engineer sent out. There's no other engineer to go, like I'm the only one available. So he comes back, company man's angry. They then called basically a bit of a conference. They called in all the roughnecks and the tool pushers and said, "Has anyone here done a back off?" And one of the roughnecks has said, "Yeah, I've done one," and one of the pushers had been involved. So they sat me with those two, and we just went out and we figured it out. I sobered up pretty quick, had a couple of coffees, and so we rigged this stuff up. So what I do is I drop this tool, which is about 2 meters long, drop it down inside the drill pipe. We anchor it, and then I get the pusher to stretch the pipe. And this tool would detect inside the steel pipe a certain amount of stretch. And so I go down, okay, it's stretching, and then suddenly you get to a point, there's no stretch here. Okay, I'll come up to the one point above, okay, we've got stretch there, none there, that's where it's stuck. So we pull that out. I then run down inside with some explosive. And so we would put primer cord up and down and put a little detonator on it. And then you get the tool pusher. So this is where maths comes in. You've got to calculate how much tension do we put on this pipe so there's neutral tension at that collar. So at the surface, there's an enormous amount of tension because you're pulling up, in this case, maybe 16,000 feet of pipe, stretching it to be no tension there. So I rig all this up, I'm sitting there doing the maths, and I set it off. And so I'm looking at the drill floor, and so at this time they've got these things called tongs that wrap around the pipe, and you're trying to unwind the pipe, but not so much that it does unwind down anywhere on the string. So there's quite a lot of maths involved in calculating all this. So stretch it, okay, up and down, working that tension down to make sure it's set it off, nothing. And company man is livid. And so he comes running into my dog house. He says, "You clown." Blah, blah. Another call to my boss. The boss is like, "There's no one available," blah, blah, blah. So then he's trying to get an engineer from a nearby rig to come out. So anyway, I pull the thing out. I've got the tool pusher running my winch. This is a very senior guy in an oil rig, and he's driving my winch on this and that. So anyway, and the manual said, maximum of this amount of pipe. So I put about another 4 layers on above the maximum you were supposed to run. You run the risk then of damaging the drill pipe. So anyway, I ran 4 more, run the tool down, fucking set it again, and then when I'm setting off explosive, I'm sending current down to a very small detonator. And I set off, and I see a little kick on the thing when it goes off, and I see the kick. And I look up, nothing. And then the whole rig goes whoosh, as all of that tension unwinds in 16,000 feet of drill pipe, and the tongs whip around. So I'd been successful at it. The thing had unwound, and I remember, king of the world, mate. And I strutted out of that fucking log cabin. I remember I said, "Up the mighty Moolies," because I said, why the fuck I'd be saying up the mighty Moolies? Who's the fucking man? And I walked around like the fucking king of that rig, eh? And then the company man, and they've got a tannoy system on oil rigs, and so I had the tool pusher. He was bringing up the tool string or whatever, so I cleaned up. Then over the tannoy, "Mr. Schlumberger, can you come to my office, please?" So I didn't care anymore, so I sort of strut on into his office, and he goes, he says, "I know you were drunk when you arrived on my rig today, weren't you?" And I said, "As I said before, sir, I only found out about 3 o'clock, and I did my best to get here." And I said, "The pipe is unstuck." He says, "Mr. Sumner, I think you've done all right." He says, "Normally you're not allowed to drink on rigs, but here's a bourbon for you." And he pours this big thing of Maker's Mark bourbon, which hands over this Maker's Mark. And then he said he wrote a very nice letter to my boss after that, saying what a good job I'd done in very difficult circumstances. I guess where I'm leading with that sort of job is really stressful. And, Schlumberger, there was no shortage of those jobs. And I kept seeing other engineers getting fired for, they mess something up. Especially once you start running explosives and radioactive sources, they're quite high risk, some of those things. I hated the radioactive sources. We would do, we had to do a white test on these, depending on what the source was, but some of them would be 6 months. Every 6 months, you've got to basically take it out of its container. You would wipe a piece of material with some alcohol in it over the surface, and I hated that stuff, Yeah. So in the end, it was kind of like I didn't need the money anymore, or I didn't value the money so much, is a better way to put it, and just sort of thought, man, maybe it's time to move on. And I'd gotten engaged to Sharon at that stage, so I thought, I'll go back to New Zealand and get a normal job, 9 to 5. I didn't get in fact, I came back, I spent a year just pig hunting and going fishing and stuff like that, actually. And then eventually Sharon was like, "Pete, I think you better get a job." So yeah, then I got, for quite a period of time, I had a relatively normal job. I worked for a couple of automation companies as an engineer. And Schlumberger put me in really good stead in a couple of ways. One is, I was in Aberdeen for a while, and then in Libya especially, you do the best with what you got. Like, it's not like I can call up someone and get an additional tool or another truck or whatever sent in. And so I got very good at just getting by with whatever the materials and hardware and stuff I have. Schlumberger really valued problem solving, and a good engineer, you can save that company millions of dollars if you're a good engineer. If you're a poor engineer, you will cost them millions. And so, those lessons I had there about being prepared, working hard, thinking, how can I solve this problem? Put me in good stead with, in many ways, what I do now.
So that, by the way, that's probably the least interesting chapter of your life.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
But okay, so it's high risk, high reward, high income. Yeah, a lot of people would do, I don't know, I suppose a comparable thing, but on a far smaller scale, is people that work in the mines in Australia, say.
Yeah.
And they do it, hard work, big money for a couple of years.
Yep.
Then they come back, buy a house, settle down with their family, and live the suburban dream.
Yeah.
That was never for you?
Yeah, well, no, it was for a period, actually. Like, when I finished up with Schlumberger, came home, did my year playing golf. I got my handicap down to 14 inside a year, and then I got a job. And I was like, actually, it takes up too much time, this golf. And so for a period of time, through until I started Earthrace, relatively content to just be the, dad and come home at 5:30 and there's a bottle of wine open and dinner's ready at 6 kind of thing. But it did feel, especially towards the end of that period, it did feel like there was something missing in my life. And, I was trying to make up for it by going hunting and stuff. And, then the change came when I started Earthrace. And, the original idea with that, so I started this business with a couple of other engineers called Cam Sensor, and we would make cameras to control robots. Went to Australia to set up a distributor there. We started doing a lot of work in Australia. Through that period, the business outgrew my ability to manage it. Once you've got kind of 20 employees, you start to need to know about ROIs and stuff like that. So I did an MBA in Sydney. And to finish the degree, I wrote a 20,000-word project, Alternative Fuels for Road Transport. And through that paper, so I end up predicting battery electric vehicles will end up becoming the norm. And that's starting to happen now. I think you give it another 20 years and they will dominate car sales. So I remember saying that, but at the time I remember seeing there was these emerging biofuels, especially biodiesel and ethanol. No one had even heard of them. And yet there was a very easy transition. Biodiesel, we ran that boat Earthrace, 100% biodiesel fuel made mostly from waste cooking oils. It's a very easy transition towards sustainability. So I wrote that paper, but at the time, no one had really heard of them. So I thought, I'll do something to promote biofuels. And I looked at various different things, how to do it. In the end, I settled on a boat. We're going to build a boat, and we'll set a record to go around the world. But initially, I thought it'd take me 6 months to build a boat, and then it'd take me 6 months to do the project, whatever. It ballooned out to be like 3 years.
Can you describe Earthrace? There'll be people that are listening to this or watching it that might do a Google image search, but it's a cool fucking boat, right?
The coolest boat in the world, mate.
What is it, like 25 metres long?
24 metres.
24 metres.
Yeah, it was designed. It was designed by a guy, Craig Looms. One of the ways I try and run a few of my projects is you spend your time picking who is the expert on it. If it's not an area that you're really specialised in, spend your time figuring out who's the best person I can get. And so for that, I decided I wanted to set a record to go around the world. I knew a wave piercer boat was the best way to do it because when you're going around the globe, you are going to get storms. And your ability to handle those storms is a key to getting the record. And I knew enough that a wave-piercing boat would be a better option. So who are the wave-piercing designers around the world? One of them is Craig Looms, based in New Zealand. There was a guy, Nigel Lyons, in UK. There was a German guy, an American. So I went and met all four of them. In the end, Craig Looms I thought was by far the best in terms of making great-looking boats. So the fact that he was a Kiwi was a bonus. So I went and contacted him, and he sponsored it in a significant way. Build me a boat to set a record to go around the world. And I want to minimise the amount of fuel that I burn, and the boat's got to look amazing. And after that, I had nothing to do with the design, almost nothing. And so Craig gets to work, and I remember one day he called me and he was like, do you want to have a shower in this? And I wasn't a boat person at this stage. I'd done I had a little wee tinny to go diving or fishing in was all I'd kind of done. I was like, do I need a shower? And Craig's like, well, it adds weight, not really. He said, okay, we'll run with that. And then he called me in a couple of weeks later and he said they were struggling. So the boat was designed to go up to 7 metres underwater with a factor of safety of 3. At the time, it was the most extreme wave-piercing boat that had ever been conceived. So, and this becomes an issue in crossing the Indian Ocean. You're probably going to get in the monsoon crossing the Indian Ocean. So he's struggling how to ventilate the engine bay. There was 2 options. You could have forced air, where the air you've got running a generator, running a fan. The air gets pushed to these vanes. The water would hit the vane and come down, whereas the air would find its way around. And then you could vent that out the side. That was option number 1. But now you're burning more fuel because you've got this generator running these forced air fans. The second option was you do it by convection, where you basically have some kind of big duct going out the top. Around the engines, the air heats up, expands, becomes lighter, and goes out the top. And then there's a second duct that takes air beneath the engine. So you can create what's called a convection cycle. Hot air out, sucking cool air in. So Craig, he explains this. He says, right, we're thinking of doing this. But he said, this is what it looks like. And they'd drawn the boat with this rooster tail coming out the back. I thought, fuck, it's a little bit out there. And he says, at the moment, it's the best we've got, but like I think it's your best option. I said, okay, run with it. And then he calls me back in about a week later, and he says, the problem we've got now is, he said, we really need to put 2 of them, one above each engine. So now there's these 2 ugly rooster tails sticking out the back. And I didn't like it, but I said, Craig, it's your boat. And then, fuck, it was quite a while later. It was several months later. So they were working on the spars and other parts of the design. He calls me and he says, Pete, I think you better come have a look at this. And they'd largely finished the design of it. And those 2 rooster tails had morphed into what looked like horns. And beneath that, it had these beautiful flowing kind of spars that were the outriggers. And instead of having sort of 2 spars on each side, they'd gone to this single spar. But man, it looked out there, eh? And I thought, oh fuck, I'm not sure about that. And he had 2 interns working for him at the time, and I called one of them. I said, "Be honest with me, what do you think of this?" He said, "It's the fucking coolest boat I've ever seen." And I said, okay, Craig, we'll run with it. And the reason that boat looks so amazing is because I had nothing to do with it. I contracted a very clever design team. I should say Craig Looms, he's got Andre and a bunch of other guys. It's not just Craig, but extremely talented guys. And they made what I still believe, I've never seen a cool-looking boat. There's a few that people might argue, but it was an amazing looking boat, and it had a genuine presence about it. It came home for me. We were building it in a yard out in Henderson, and I went away for a couple of weeks. I'd run out of money, and I was busy trying to scrounge up the money to stop going bankrupt.
So what did it cost you? 3 million? 4 million?
Yeah, about 3 million to build it, of which I put in about 1.5, and then I loaned quite a bit, and we had sponsorship of bits and pieces. But yeah, 3 million is roughly what it cost you to build it if you didn't have sponsors and stuff. But anyway, I'd been away for a couple of weeks trying to stave off bankruptcy. I come back to the boatyard and they just put the graphics on it. We had a guy, Inya Taylor, who's a sort of famous tattooist out in Helensville. He'd done this taiha along the bow of it, and also done the graphics on the horn. I remember walking along the boat like, man, it does look cool. It does look cool. And it was sometimes I would get desensitized to it because I'm on the boat so long, and then if I'd leave the boat for a few days and come back and it's sitting down on the viaduct, man, you couldn't walk by that boat and not take a second look at it. And it was great promotion for us. If that boat turned up in any harbour in the world, there was always media interest in it, and we had to put in perspective over the port tour. We visited 180 cities. We had over 250,000 people walked aboard that boat over the several years of port tours. In fact, what saved me, when we had the boat launched, I had a couple of creditors that I hadn't paid for a considerable period of time, and they were considering bankrupting me. And what saved me was the port tour around New Zealand. We took the boat on the first part of the port tour. We took it to Tairua, where my mum had a place at the time. Took it to Tairua, turned up. We pull in there at like 6 o'clock in the morning. There's not anyone there to even catch our line. So, we tie the boat off, and then 7 o'clock there's mum, dad, and a couple of kids come down, and then 9 o'clock there's a queue, and then we had people all day. And I think we put 400 people through the boat in that day, and all paying $5 or $10 to come aboard, and it became we got better at the media game. At the end of it, in a relatively small town, on a big day, we could put 1,000 people a day through that boat, and that was what saved me financially. Was just mum, dad, and the kids coming down. We'd visit schools and stuff as well, so we got quite good at that media game. How do we get people down aboard the boat to stop Pete going bankrupt? And then sponsors like that. Sponsors like the fact that you put it in town and 500 people come down. The sponsors, they got their stickers on the side. We would do events for them, take them out for rides on the boat. Took a lot of kids out for rides on the boat as well.
What was on the inside? So there's a cockpit. Are there hammocks? Hammocks for you to...
We had what's called pipe cots, where you've got 2 carbon tubes like that, and then a sort of canvas slung between them. So we had 4 pipe cots. So
it could have been luxurious, but instead it was designed for racing.
Pretty basic, mate.
Toilet?
For the first 18 months, I didn't have a toilet on it, and we had a company, Tecmar, who they made a run of 30 carbon race toilets for the Volvo 60s. They had 2 spare, so these things were 10 grand each. They sponsored one, so I ended up with this carbon toilet on the boat. And after that, you just hang your bum over the back and do what you got to do. So when suddenly there's this toilet, I remember saying, because I wasn't a boat person, I just thought, if you're out on a runabout, you need to go to the toilet, you go over the back. And so suddenly I remember thinking the small miracle, you just press a button and it'd disappear out of there. Yeah.
So
very basic inside. It was the helm was like a race car. I had Recaro race seats, quite narrow, only about that. Like I'm a skinny guy, and I would fit in quite comfortably. But every now and then we got quite big people on the boat who would sit in the chair, and I had a little Momo steering wheel on it. So the helm of it felt like a little race car.
So it's designed for speed, not for comfort.
For sure not comfort.
So you take that thing around the world in 60 days, which is a world record. Still stands?
Still stands. There's been 3 boats since then that have had a crack at it, but it's hard. It's more a challenge of reliability, and you're going to get problems. So for you to get a boat around the world, it's almost impossible that you're not going to have problems. And so it becomes a challenge of, okay, we're going to get problems. How can we deal with those? Interestingly, the first attempt, we failed miserably. The second attempt, we got the record and we beat it by over 2 weeks. When I look at the 2 teams, this was a completely new team. Largely the same in terms of capabilities. I had great engineers and what have you, but the second team, I think I did a better job of leading them. The first round the world attempt, in many ways I let the team down. I made poor decisions at key times. The second time around, like for example, we put these new propellers from a company, Earthrace in Germany, made of carbon. Carbon propellers weren't well proven in long voyages. They flex under load, which is kind of nice, but if you get a very small flaw on one of those carbon race propellers, you'll start to get cavitation there, and then eventually it starts to eat away, and then the more it eats away, the more the cavitation accelerates, and then next thing your propellers come into bit. So it was on the very first leg. We've run this boat for a year and barely had any problems. And then first leg of the record attempt, from Barbados to Panama, halfway through the night, suddenly there's this like whole boat shaking, and I sort of, man, is it the propeller or drive shaft? I go down to the engine room and it all looks all right, and then 10 minutes later, woo, 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 again. And so what's happening is this blade that's got this corrosion, if you like, starting to eat away at it, it's losing strength, and every now and then when it's under load it starts to flap around. So we pull in there and we lost a bunch of time, ended up having to get some propellers down. Didn't have spare propellers, my call, that's about 20 grand worth. Didn't have the 20 grand at the time, and we had a lot of problems in Palau. We ended up arranging. So we had some engine problems. We needed to basically rebuild the engine. We had a problem with an injector that put a tiny bit of metal down into one of the cylinders. The cylinder got burnt out. So basically we had to drop the sump out, take the head off, remove the old cylinder sleeve, put a new one in here, put a new one here. I had 2 different teams both sending us the same bits. They found out they were sending it. They found out they were sending it. They didn't send it. I should have been right. Like the key to us getting this record, we got to get the stuff here as quickly as possible. So in the end, no one sent it. And then 2 days later, so my follow-up was very poor on that.
Attention to detail.
Yeah. Which is, I'll confess, it's not a strength of mine. When I was working for Schlumberger, very early on, one of my bosses took me aside and he was like, he said, the problem with you, Pete, is you're too slap happy. He said, you don't have great attention to detail. And to be a great engineer with Schlumberger, you need to sort that shit out. And he was right. Like, I was a little bit slap happy. And even today, as a ship's captain, good captains have attention to detail. And I know it's a weakness, and I work on it, but I much prefer to have other crew members that I divvy that out to. But I'm still responsible. You're captain of the boat, and there's a cock up because someone didn't have attention to detail something. It's still my problem.
Yeah,
and
buck stops
it's
with
my
you.
fault. Yeah, buck stops with you. Yeah.
So, travelling Earthrace around the world in 60 days. What's the best day and the worst day on the water?
Worst day, I had a few. I think when the boat was launched, we did a tour around New Zealand. The last day of the tour was in Raglan. And so we had a great weekend there. I think the plan was a week later we would leave and cross over. We left Raglan. There was a big storm had been brewing offshore. And to this state, the boat's been in the water, say, 3 months. We haven't really been tested in rough seas. And the designers were like, Pete, the boat will handle anything. You don't need to worry about that. So I was quite gung-ho. And keep in mind, I haven't spent a lot of time on the water at this stage. So we get the boat, the storm's coming in. I go out and this storm is hitting. And I don't know what the wind was, but I would estimate now probably 40 to 50 knots. And the seas were big. Like, we had good 8-metre breaking waves at times. And I shat my pants. And in the end, I was the only one capable of driving the boat. The other crew were all sick. I had a young girl, Ayla, on the boat. She was horribly ill. And I made the call on the radio. I called the Coast Guard. So I wanted to take the boat back over Raglan Bar. Back over Manukau Bar. By this time, we're up a little bit out from Manukau. Bad call. The boat was fine. I should have just carried on riding, sort of bow on into these seas until it calmed down. But I made the call to Coast Guard. They send a boat out, which is half the size of mine, and here's these volunteers coming out to help me and guide me over the Manukau Bar. Manukau Bar is quite tricky. You come on in and then you take a 90 degree and you've got these sometimes quite big waves hitting you on your beam. And I remember thinking, here's these guys and this tiny little boat relative to mine coming to rescue me. Anyway, I followed them in and anchored up the boat. And then they left, and in the morning they came down. I was super embarrassed about it, super embarrassed. And in hindsight, I risked all of their lives. Like, those guys shouldn't have been called out in those seas. I'm in a much bigger boat. I should have just ridden it out. And I was quite sheepish about it. And it was a wake-up call for me about, taking the sea for granted as well. I was pretty gung-ho about it, and then there was a valuable lesson. Interestingly on that, and in many ways, I was like the amateur, and I remember the captain had he sat me down, and he said, was that the right call calling us out last night? And he didn't need to say it. I knew I'd risk the lives of my crew as well. Bringing it in over a bar when you got 8-metre waves coming in, like, that's foolhardy. Offshore, much safer, much safer. Anyway, 3 years later, to finish that off, I wanted to take the boat up to Hamilton, my hometown, and I called up Mighty River Power. I knew they could raise and lower the river levels, and they'd said, we're not going to do anything with that. They used to do it at Karapiro for the rowing regattas and stuff, but anyway, I called them up, and they were a bit rude to me. And then I also approached Environment Waikato. There's a shallow patch around Huntly Power Station between there and sort of around Taupuri, what I knew was a little bit tricky. And Environment Waikato, they basically sent me a letter saying, we're not allowing you to come up the Waikato River. But I ended up doing some digging. They couldn't do that. Like, I have free rite of passage up there. But the trouble I had was my boat I didn't think was shallow enough. What I did was I called up Raglan Coast Guard. On the second trip around, we did a fundraiser at Raglan Coast Guard. We raised about $8,000. So I'd do a public speaking gig for them. They would call in the people. So I'd raise quite a bit of money for them. I said, how about we do a training exercise with Raglan Coast Guard, and we take your boat up and you tow us. So there was a jet boat, and a pretty decent boat. So that became the project. So we drove up a little bit before Huntly, and then I jumped out. We took the rudders and the propellers out. And so now we only drew about 1 metre, and the Raglan Coast Guard towed us all the way up to Hamilton, and then we got all the way up to Cambridge. One of the greatest voyages of my life. Interestingly, the Waikato River, Hamilton looks away from it. You've got you've got this extraordinary river, that no one really valued. You used to be able to buy for 150 grand. You could buy a house with a view of the Waikato River because everyone's like, oh, it's smelly, dirty river. It's not smelly and dirty. It's one of the great rivers of New Zealand. It came home for me on that trip, having travelled the world for 3 years and having gone up and down all these rivers and canals and stuff. I get the Waikato, my home turf. This is a great river. And one of the greatest voyages of my life was that time going up the Waikato River with Coast Guard. And it was a great training exercise for Ag and Coast Guard. So after that, we took the boat up to Manukau, and then Manukau Coast Guard, they would say, hey, could we do a training exercise with you guys? We'll go out, we'll simulate some accidents and, help our crew. So, yeah, okay, so we go out over the bar. There were some big seas on this day, and next thing, their boat stops. They get a guy with a busted shoulder and someone else was injured, and I would suggest quite poor in the way they handled it. And in some ways it felt like I had become the teacher rather than being the cheeky little upstart who was risking people's lives. And then I could come in and help the Coast Guard with their training and stuff. We did that quite a few times. UK Coast Guard, the RNLI, super well funded, and a bunch of times around UK. We would do training exercises where I would simulate, let's say, cardiac arrest, and they would fly out a helicopter and winch, one or two of my crew off my ship. And so, I was very conscious in our travels. We always tried to work with Coast Guard and do training with them and, help my crew in terms of learning, how those search and rescue go. And a number of times we helped on fire, on boats flooded. We pulled one boat out of Cornwall where the boat ran aground on the rocks, so we managed to pull him off the rocks before he got completely smashed up. And after a few years on the boat, I got to understand a lot more about it. I was at a disadvantage. I think if you're raised on the water, there's a lot of learning that you would take for granted. I never really had that as a kid, so Earthrace was a steep learning curve for me.
And getting that world record, was it as meaningful as what you hoped, or you accomplished this massive goal, and then it feels like something's...
It was one of the great days of my life when we got that record. Yeah, because there'd been so much heartache, and I did. We never really knew we were going to get it until you cross that finish line, and it was worthwhile. Yeah, it was an amazing combination of so many people. Like, I got very good at managing volunteers. So in the construction in New Zealand, we had volunteers. We would take kids from Tangaroa College. We would take them out on Saturday and Sunday, help and build the boat, and then they got to have trips on the boat. Running a volunteer program, and then during the refit before the record, we had the boat in Sagunto in Spain. And that was our finish line from Sagunto. Once we got the record, I had a sponsor of mine, Bobo, who he's a tech investor in Atlanta, Georgia. He comes in and he says, Pete, I'll sponsor the night. We'll get a club and I'll put on a couple buses. And I think we must have had about 100 people there. So my boat's only 6 people, but we had all these volunteers that had a piece of ownership. Crew had, spent long days and nights sanding the boat and painting it and changing engine mounts and all the work that had gone into putting that boat together. I was the lucky guy who got to drive it for 12 hours a day, but there was, the engineers and all the rest of it. So it was a pretty special week when we got the record, and it was, I think, in terms of a journey. I talked before about people aren't jealous of the journey you've gone on, but that's where the value is, and that was an extraordinary period of my life to have this idea to build the world's coolest boat. We did manage that, I reckon, and then we're going to set a record for a powerboat to circle the globe, and that whole journey was probably a year to get money, a year to get a plan, a year to get money, a year to build the boat. There's 3 years, and then another 3 years or another 2 years before we got the record. So this 5-year journey to finally go getting that record and delivering what we said we would do, it was worth it, and it, in many ways, it sort of set me up for what do I want to do now? And, that it had sort of highlighted for me the strengths I have in terms of leading small teams. I'm not a good leader of big teams. I'm a good leader of a small team with a very focused mission. And, after that, the thought of going back and doing some automation company, doing robotic control or something, and that was the start too of me pursuing having genuine goals that make the world a better place. having a purpose in my life. And after that, I couldn't just go back and do a normal job.
You're in too deep.
Yeah, in too deep.
Yes, you've reached that tipping point.
I said this when I gave that TED talk. I talked about it's like the Matrix, the red pill and the blue pill. Once you get to work on things you genuinely believe in, it's very hard to go back the other day. I mean, you might find that with what you're doing. You're doing these podcasts, and I would suggest there's more to this than you just making a few bucks. I think you've got a genuine role to play in terms of telling people stories that other people have value in, and there might be lessons in there for people. You're lucky when you get in that space. Most people, they spend their lives earning money to buy a car and buy a house and to get by. Those of us who get to work on stuff we genuinely believe in, we're blessed. And you're probably one of them, I'd suggest.
Yeah.
Dom's thinking now. He's like, oh,
yeah, that's an interesting one, because I had that quote from your daughter, Danielle, before, and in the same article she talked about the sort of like mocking or judgment she had early on, like, your dad lives on people's sofas, and your dad does this, your dad does that, and it's like, you've done some wild things, but it's just not everyone's conventional definition of success and what success is.
Yeah, well, if you put money to the side. Like, money is one way you can go judging a person's life, and it's kind of the conventional way. How much money have you made? Or often, let's say you go to a dinner party, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a neuroscientist. There's, people would think that is being successful. But if you put money to the side, there's a few goals you'd want to have in life. You'd want to raise great kids. If you're gonna go down the road of having kids, you want to raise great kids. But I in my world in conservation, I have this saying: is the world a better place with you in it? In fact, I gave a talk at a conference in New Zealand once where they had a group of C-level executive, CEOs, CFOs, and COOs, and they had a workshop where I went out with about 25 of them. And I went round to and so at the start of the talk, I went to them and I said, so, give me what you're proudest of in your life. What one achievement have you made that you're proudest of? And it's I use the same on my crew today. When they get on board, often I'll say to them, what are you proudest of? So I go to the first CEO and he sort of says, oh well, I've got 2 great kids that I'm doing a great job of. I was like, fuck you, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and you've got 2 kids, like it's obligatory that you raise great kids. It's not optional, So I go to the next guy, and he was the CEO of a carpet retailer. I won't give the name, but it was a carpet retailer, and he said, I employ 350 people. We're the top carpet retailer in New Zealand, or whatever. And I was like, so I said, well, what happens if you were to close down? Is there other companies? How much competition? Oh, yeah, there's 4 or 5 companies, but we're kind of the best, whatever. I said, but you're easily replaced. And then third guy, again, he had something. So I was trying to make them a little bit uncomfortable to hear what I had to say. And then the third guy was the same. Then the fourth guy, he had volunteered in Africa doing water wells in an area that had a lot of cholera, where the sewage was interacting with the water table they were pulling their water wells from. So he'd gone there and they'd drilled some deeper wells. So I said, like, now we're talking, and so I use the thing to say, the people who I admire the most, there's purpose to what they do. So they might have their normal job, but they stand for something that is bigger than just them or their family. Anyway, so I gave the talk, and then, afterwards a couple of them came up, and there's a couple of them shuffled out awkwardly. But I guarantee a few of them started to question, hey, look, and keep in mind at this thing, you've got New Zealand's greatest leaders. Like, you're the CEO of a business that employs 300 or 400 people. Like, you're a pretty powerful individual in a country of only 4 or 5 million. Anyway, I got an email a year later from a guy who, he said, I don't know if you remember me, but I was in that talk you gave it a year or two ago at the such and such a conference, just to let you know. And this guy was from a legal background. He was a CFO at the time, but he was a legal background. He went and he was helping the indigenous tribes in Amazon stop Shell from drilling in indigenous lands. And he said, and we just won the court case. And he said, I wouldn't have done that without you coming in and making me kind of rethink the way I've led my life. And he said, I'm here for another 6 months and I'm probably going to go back to New Zealand sort of thing. So, I try and focus on purpose, and I think the saying I have is the world a better place with you in it? And I can genuinely say, in my case, it's fractionally better. I don't claim to be amazing, but I've been lucky to be on some teams that have done some stuff that, in terms of wildlife, has definitely improved things around the world. The sad thing is that there's not a lot of people can say that. The world pays a heavy price for us. You think of how much fuel you use, electricity, the consumption of goods and the plastics and polymers you use, your clothing, the food you use, all the farmland that's tied up with Dom getting by each year. The planet pays a heavy price for every one of us. And my philosophy is there's an obligation to pay it back in some way. And so with my work, I try and do that. I also try and in my talks, it doesn't have to be conservation. For a lot of people, they might get the same kind of reward out of their church, for example. The church used to be a lot more important in terms of that was probably the main cause that in a little wee town like Hamilton, a lot of people went to church and they might get involved in missionary programs or something. But, you look, the world's in a lot of strife at the moment. Look what's happening in Iran and Gaza and stuff. Human rights are an issue, or animal rights or conservation. There's a bunch of things that you can stand for. And so I try and say to people, you make the world a better place with you being in it.
It's a great message.
Yeah.
So after the Earthrace world record, I felt like there was peak Pete Bethune, right? Household name in New Zealand, rock star.
I don't know about rock star.
Must have felt like that at the time. Like you, after a huge adventure like that, you could have dined on that for the rest of your life. You could have made money on the keynote speech circuit around New Zealand. Still be dining out on that now, getting the message across in a very, very safe, comfortable way. But instead, you rename the boat Earthrace Ady Gil, and you team up with Sea Shepherd. So, what is Sea Shepherd, and who is Ady Gil?
So, I'll back that up a bit. So after we got the record, then there's this chance to have a reset. But I talked before about the blue pill and the red pill. I'd taken the blue pill and I couldn't go back to a normal 9-to-5 job. The problem I had was that became disruptive in my marriage. And so I remember Sharon and I, we kind of both knew that I couldn't go back and live the old life. But that basically meant the right thing to do is to get separated and divorced. And that was a very difficult period. And keep in mind, I've got, 2 daughters that are, now young teenagers, and that's a challenge. But I remember thinking this is the right thing to do. And I think Sharon realised if I had been sort of forced to go back to that 9 to 5 doing an automation project stuff, I would have been probably quite miserable. And so we got separated. And then there was that question, what am I going to do? I've got this very cool boat, connected with Sea Shepherd. So Sea Shepherd in those days was involved mostly in trying to stop whaling in Antarctica. I'd seen there was a TV show called Whale Wars, and my crew had watched season 1 and season 2. I got connected, and I remember thinking at the time, these guys are a bunch of muppets. And I thought, I'll go to Antarctica and wreak some havoc, and I still, again, probably quite cheeky and a little bit overconfident on things. But anyway, I formed a deal with Sea Shepherd where they would buy the boat off me for $1.5 million. In fact, it was Ady Gil put in $1 million, and Sea Shepherd were to put in $500,000, but it was delayed by a year. I'd captain the boat to Antarctica, and I'd be under the command of Paul Watson, who was sort of considered the admiral of the fleet. So we painted the boat black. We put a whole lot of extra carbon on the outside of the hull under the water to give it some impact resistance. The boat was largely carbon. Carbon has a problem where it's quite brittle. It's extremely strong and stiff for its weight, but it is brittle. So if you get a crack, let's say an iceberg hits carbon, that crack can propagate through. So the Kevlar, by adding that, gives it some impact resistance, so it localises the damage. So we did this big refit and took the boat down to Antarctica with a big song and dance. I had a film crew from Animal Planet. They were filming a show called Whale Wars aboard us. One of the great adventures of my life. Not easy, like Antarctica, chasing those Japanese whalers was a great roller coaster. I had lots of ideas. We had one which is a little bit little bit out there, which caused me some problems later on. But one of the plans was, the problem with whaling in Antarctica, it's a non-issue to the Japanese people. It's not discussed at the dinner table. It's not in the media in any way, shape or form, other than a positive thing. Hey, here's the Japanese mothership and harpoon boats heading down to Antarctica. And whaling, the whale meat is held a lot of respect for the whale industry from old people in Japan. After the end of World War II, MacArthur was basically in charge of not the reconstruction, but in terms of the transition back to Japan becoming an independent country. And MacArthur came in and he said, right, let's teach these guys how to whale. Up until then, they'd done coastal whaling where they would herd whales into shore and kill them, or dolphin. They converted a bunch of the Japanese boats to whaling boats. So Japan never did oceanic whaling until after World War II. And at that time, the Japanese meat industry was dead. Like they had consumed everything. So there's no cows, no sheep, no rabbits, no chickens, no nothing. Everything is gone. So whale was super important to them for a period of time. And that's why today, whaling amongst young people in Japan, they don't care. But old people care quite deeply about it because that was what saved them after World War II. So I'd gone down there thinking, how can we make the Japanese people start to care about whaling? And one of the ideas I had was to shoot cyanide into a dead whale and have them process it, and then run a media campaign in Japan highlighting the fact that, Pete Bethune shot cyanide into this whale and they processed it. And Japan are awfully anal about their food. You look at, if you go into any of their supermarkets, everything is exactly the same. They take kiwi, they take all of our best kiwi fruit, for example. They take our fish, but it's got to be exactly the right size. Super anal about their food. So I remember thinking, if I could get a thing of cyanide into a whale, and the time you'll do this, so they kill a whale, then they'll tow it back and they will pass a wire cable up to the processing ship, and then the whale is dragged for a bit and then pulled up. So I proposed to Paul Watson, I said, let me take a 50 cal gun, I'll lace the bullets for cyanide, and I'll jump on my jet ski and I'll shoot the whale as they're transitioning from the harpoon vessel to pulling it in the thing. And Paul Watson, he's like, I'm not going to allow you to take a gun. So I said, what about a bow and arrow? And he's like, oh, yeah. Eventually I managed to convince, okay, you can take a bow and arrow. I didn't really want to shoot cyanide. I went and sat my cyanide license. So I went and sat through the course and a couple of tests or whatever. So now I've got my cyanide license, so I can legally buy cyanide. So I go and buy some cyanide. It looks like wasabi. It's like this green paste. So I have the cyanide and I have some wasabi in Antarctica. So now I'm talking to the Animal Planet cameraman about this cunning plan I've got to shoot these whales with this thing. So they were filming this. And so
is that to contaminate the meat so it's useless to them?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I thought about all sorts of, how can I contaminate the meat? And this sort of, I talked before about problem solving. I'm a great problem solver at times. So here's some of the ideas I had. You get some blood from a person with AIDS. A little bit out there, but it's a definite media hook. Media would follow that story. You could be accused of, hey, it's, you're denigrating, people who might have AIDS or whatever, but that's a decent media hook. I thought about getting some period blood and using that. Could just be normal blood, and you say it's, from a woman who's ovulating. I thought about getting some cesium-137. You can access cesium-137 if you these various companies that go using this for doing radioactive work. So I think you could, now you're verging on quite significant. Trying to think what that is. It's a form of terrorism now. But keep in mind, I'm looking at various options. In the end, I chose the cyanide route, but I wasn't going to shoot cyanide. I was going to shoot wasabi, but we were going to tell the Japanese we shot cyanide. Went down there, I made a man's spud gun that I wanted to shoot red blood on the Nishin Maru, the processing ship, to symbolise blood. Media likes that sort of symbolism stuff. So I took down a whole lot of VB bottles would fit inside a 2.5-inch tube of aluminium. So I took down a whole bunch of VB beer, we drank them and put red paint in those things, and on one of the days went out and shot the Nishin Maru full of red paint, and ended up there was a whole bunch of T-shirts at one stage that had the boat with the Nishin Maru on the side, and here's my red paint. We prop fouled the Nishin Maru, an 8,000-ton vessel, and we managed to get a wire cable down and feed this thing inside their propeller, disable the boat for a period of time. I'm quite embarrassed about it now as a mariner, highly illegal. Here's the thing in Antarctica. It's like this no man's land where no one has jurisdiction. There's no police, there's no navy. It's illegal to take military boats down there, except on humanitarian things. So if there's a search and rescue, New Zealand can send a Navy ship down there. You're not allowed to send a Navy ship down there to do any form of military exercise. So the Japanese had their security vessel, but it's not a military vessel. There's this curious thing called interplay where, and this affected me in terms of prison in Japan. Interplay is where you've got different jurisdictions may have a say on an event that happens, depending on how you look at it. So to give you an example, when the Ady Gil was rammed, it was in territory that's claimed by Australia. So Australia, New Zealand, and Russia and other countries have all made territorial claims in Antarctica. There's a chunk of Antarctica that New Zealand claims that's its own. There's a chunk that Australia claims. Where my boat got rammed by the Japanese, that's an Australian territory claimed by them. So an Australian judge could take a court case over my boat being rammed because it was in what's claimed as Australian waters. Japan doesn't recognise that. The Japanese boat that ran me over, the trial could also be held in Japan because it was a Japanese vessel that was involved in it. It could also be held in New Zealand because it was a New Zealand vessel that got rammed. So this thing of interplay, there's a whole series of countries that potentially a court case could be held in. And that affected me in the end when I boarded the Shonan Maru. I was taken back to Japan as a prisoner. They could prosecute me in Japan because the moment I boarded the Japanese boat, now it's considered to be a crime happening in Japan.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So this super cool boat we're talking about, Earthrace, which was renamed Ady Gil. So you're in Antarctic waters, and this Japanese boat basically runs you over.
Yeah.
Like intentionally drives into you and snaps the boat in half.
Yeah, so that was so we had just disabled the Nishin Maru. So we'd managed to get a steel cable. They had stopped. I only had about 200 litres of fuel left, and we were about, I think, 2 days from getting refueled by the Steve Irwin, another one of the Sea Shepherd boats. So basically my job is done. I'm going to sit here for the next couple of days, just maintain the boat heading into the sea so we don't get too tricky. And this is where I let everyone down on this day. So I said to the guys, right, let's just stop here. I had Jason, who was my engineer, I had him down driving the boat, and I said, just stick it. We had the engines at idle in gear just to maintain a heading into the sea. We're all sitting up on the horns, whoo, great day, yeah, we fuck the Japanese up, yeah. And then the boats came rolling. So the Nishin Maru's disabled here. Japanese are livid. The Yushin Maru number 2, one of their harpoon boats come past. Yushin Maru number 3 comes past. Yushin Maru number 1. So the harpoon boats all come past. The last boat to come past is the Shonan Maru, which is the security vessel that we've probably done the most messing with. Like we messed them up considerably on a number of occasions. So this boat's coming by on our port side, and sort of over a period of 3 waves, he starts to turn into us. He sort of goes 1, 2, and then on the 3rd wave, like it was bigger than the others, and he sort of comes down here, and then Jason, who's driving, suddenly he realises we're about to be run over, and he tries to turn like this, but it's too late. So their boat comes down, 800 tonne, my boat was 16, smashes the whole bow off the boat. And
like cuts it in half.
Yeah. And so, are
you shitting yourself?
Yeah. Like over the last probably 10 seconds prior to that, I remember thinking, man, they're cutting this a bit fine. But then that last 10 seconds and comes and smashes the front off the boat. I thought the boat was going to sink. Now I think it's not going to sink. It's just carbon and foam and Kevlar. Like it's super light. So it wouldn't sink. But at the time I thought, holy shit, this is serious. So we called up one of the other Sea Shepherd boats. They came and rescued us, transferred my crew onto the Bob Barker, which was another boat. But here's my poor boat has been largely destroyed. This part is not really so much in the public domain. I've come clean about this, but I'll tell you what genuinely happened, because in the public domain, mostly the story is quite different. After that happened, the boat's salvageable. So we put together a plan. The French have a big research vessel down at, the name escapes me, but they've got a big research base in Antarctica. We're about a day and a half sailing from there. So the plan is we're going to tow the boat there. They will lift it into their research vessel and drop it off in Hobart, which was their next stop. That becomes the plan. Then I get a call from Paul Watson, and he wants me to sink the boat. And, I said, the boat's not going to sink because it's coming here. But he said, I want you to do your best to make the boat sink. And so the following morning, I go into the boat. There's only 4 of us who are privy to this. There was myself, Chuck Swift, who was the captain of the boat, a guy who was the comms officer, and myself. 4 of us, we go over to my boat. I go inside. I take off the lids off the seacocks, so now water's starting to drain into the engine room. And so I start crying as I'm doing that. This has been my life for 5 or 6 years, and here I am, deliberately scuttling my boat. I go back to the Bob Barker. I go up to the bridge and I say, hey, look, if the boat sinks tonight, or don't come and wake me. The boat's badly damaged. And so I go to bed, and of course the next morning I get up, and through the night the boat got lower and lower until the tow rope broke. The captain of the boat, knows that this is part of the plan. The boat drives off. And when I look back at what I've done over the last, let's say 15, 20 years, it's the one regret I have. I've made mistakes, and I accept the mistakes were part of that journey. I made my best call at the time, but on this day I betrayed a lot of people, and let down the sponsors, let down Ady Gil. Ady Gil owns the boat, and my loyalty lay with Sea Shepherd, but he's given them his boat. They rented it for $1 a year. And to be involved with that, and at the time, so I told my crew the following day what had happened, and they were pretty pissed off, and rightly so. But we kind of kept it quiet. I didn't, and then after that I got taken to Japan as a prisoner, and then when I got out, it was burning me up. And when I got out of Japan, I was quite a mess. My family was waiting for me at the airport. There was a big media contingent there to see me. And anyway, meeting my family, and basically I said, hey, I've got something to tell you. I deliberately sunk my boat. And it's kind of it's the one thing I'm ashamed of. I let so many people down that day. And then, I remember vowing, I'm never going to do that shit again. Sometimes in life you've got to make some hard decisions. And what happened that day, I just showed a lack of backbone. I should have said, if you want it fucking sunk, you sink it yourself. I'm not going to do it. Lying to media, lying to sponsors, lying to donors, lying to all these people, pretending that we did our best to save the boat when we fucking sunk it. Yeah. And so it was a lesson for me. I can use the excuse. I can say, look, I've just been run over. I was under stress, but it doesn't excuse what we did.
Geez, I can tell it still cuts you deeply. So after that, that's where you get on a jet ski and you go up alongside this mess. By the way, there's footage of all this stuff online. These stories sound unbelievable, but there's footage on YouTube. So you get on a jet ski, you go up alongside this massive Japanese ship, you climb on up. Your plan is to arrest the captain?
The plan is not to arrest the captain. The plan is, that is my excuse for boarding the boat. He's not, he's the captain of a Japanese security vessel. I'm one guy, he's not going to be able to arrest him. The problem we had with Japan, I mentioned before, whaling is a non-issue in Japan. And to put it in perspective, the ramming and severe damage of my boat was a page 5 story in the Japan Times. Not everywhere else in the world it was front page news. Number 1 story in New Zealand, Australia, America, Britain. In Japan, a non-issue, despite what had happened. So I remember thinking, one of the ways we can get this story into Japan is I'll go back there as a prisoner. And I figured there would be sympathy for me because my boat was rammed and largely impacted.
Wait, that was your plan. That was your
Plan was always to go back to Japan as a prisoner.
Why the fuck would you want to do that?
To take the story there, to make them start covering the story.
It's a huge personal price, though.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest, I didn't think I would do 5 months in prison. I thought they would deport me in 3 or 4 days under their immigration laws. And I made it hard for them. So Sea Shepherd, the moment I boarded the boat, they stayed in radio contact for a period, and they then went chasing the Nishin Maru. So they didn't hang around. So they made it very difficult for the Japanese to transfer me. Sea Shepherd refused to take me back. They could have dropped me to Australia. The ramming happened in Australian waters. If they took that boat to Australia, Sea Shepherd was right ready to go formally asking Maritime Australia to go arresting the captain. Same for New Zealand. The only other place they tried dropping me off in Indonesia because we would go through the Straits of Timor. Indonesia wanted nothing to do it because now it's a big story in Western media. And so the plan was, my excuse is they rammed and sunk my boat. Here's an invoice for $3 million and I'm arresting the captain of it. Come back with me on the Sea Shepherd boat. They would never do that. But by me going back to Japan as a prisoner, it would force them to cover the story. And that's exactly what happened. Like the moment in fact, what happened on that, it was roughly 30 days for me to get to Japan. It started the story in media. They ran, I was an SAS assassin trained in South Africa. Where does that come? All this nonsense. So by the time I got there, media was not at all positive. It was all negative about me. When the day the Shonan Maori pulled into Tokyo Harbour, 8 news helicopters in the air to film this very evil man. And they traced me around. They put a hood over my head and I'm sort of shackled to a guy in front of me, a guy behind me, and I'm like this common criminal being wheeled out of the Shonan Maori, transferred into a Coast Guard boat and then transferred to the Coast Guard prison. So initially I had 2 or 3 days in the Coast Guard prison. And so it became the number one story for a significant period of time. I don't know the total number of days, but I would guess it maybe a total of 12 days. It was the number one story in Japan. Every time, so it was the initial 3 or 4 days of my arrest. Then on day 3, they took me back to Yokohama, where the Shonan Maori got shifted to Yokohama. They wanted me to reenact what I'd done. Here's my 8 helicopters, all filming again. There's a media. They set up an area for media to film quite a distance away. They've got an ambulance on standby. They've arranged a big jet ski there for me to get on this jet ski. And so in the end, they wanted me to explain and this is part of their prosecution process. So this is going to be used against me. But I did a lot of work to board the boat. I'm quite proud of what I did. So I'm going to tell them exactly what I did. So anyway, I said, you've got to get 3 guys on the jet ski. 3 guys on a jet ski is hard. When you're underway and moving, it's relatively easy. But when you first start off, it's quite hard. So I had Larry, my engineer, on the front, me in the middle. We had an Animal Planet cameraman on the back. So they put 3 guys on the jet ski. They flip it 3 or 4 times. Eventually, you don't need 3 guys. Just put 2. So and keep in mind, this is in Yokohama Harbour, which is pretty flat. And the ship is not anchored, it's tied off on a dock. They put 2 guys on there and they bumble their way. The guy didn't know how to ride a jet ski properly. Jet skis are water jet, so they slide sideways quite a lot. And if you take your throttle off, then you lose your steering. So they bang into the side of the boat a few times. Eventually, they get alongside where I climbed up. The guy climbs up on the side. He's not so effective. You're doing a muscle up. He's not strong enough to do it. He sort of tries and tries and tries, then he sort of falls down, and then they go and get a second guy. The second guy comes in. He's trying to climb up the side. Same thing, he can't do it, and it's quite high. Eventually, he falls down between the jet ski and the hull, and he breaks his nose, and there's blood pissing out his nose from the side. So then eventually they abandon that, and they go and do other things. Anyway, what happened from that day, there was a story ran as Pete Bethune, The Last Samurai, and they said, while we don't agree with Pete Bethune, you've got to admire what he achieved in Antarctica. He boarded this boat in the middle of the night in 2 metre swell and a half-metre chop with icebergs around, and yet Japanese Coast Guard couldn't do it in Yokohama Harbour at 12 in the afternoon. And so as Pete Bethune, The Last Samurai, the end conclusion of it was no, because I lacked integrity. But it was the first inkling of a softening of Japanese media towards me, the first start of a softening. And then when I got to prison, I was treated like Hannibal Lecter. So my security detail was 100 men and 3 buses. I'm in the middle bus, and when I get out, I'm tied to a guard in front of me and a guard behind me, and all these guys running security. And I think partly because there was a lot of protests. When they first took me ashore on the Coast Guard boat, there's 500 protesters. They're all throwing eggs and carrying on. And every time my court case came up, there was all these protesters would turn up. That was when there's a journalist finally came in and saw me, and she said, "Congratulations, Mr. Bethune, you're the most hated man in Japan right now." And I'm like, well, I thought I was quite a nice guy. I'm hated. So they get me to the prison, and I'm wheeled out like Hannibal Lecter, and there's all these other inmates. There's 10 of them in a row, 1 guard in front, 1 behind, and I'm like royalty, for want of a better word, and they pushed all of them aside. So my induction happened, boom, 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 while all these other inmates got pushed to the side for my induction. The induction is a horrible process. They strip you naked, and people are trying to see, is it true what I say about white guys, and they look up your bum, and you've got to piss in a thing, and
humiliating.
Yeah. So you leave your dignity at the prison gates when you go in there. Yeah. And so the induction, it kind of took about a couple of hours by the time they measure you for clothing, and then you get issued, clothing's issued right then. They took photos of all your scars. The guy said to me, "I've got plenty of scars from whatever." The guy said, "So many scars, what do you do?" I was like, "I'm a possum hunter from New Zealand." So they go through the induction, and then they take me up to, and so I'm put in Ward 11 in Block 4, which was the highest security ward in the country. Keep in mind, it's a remand facility where inmates haven't been convicted yet. So they're all inmates whose trial is ongoing or about to happen, kind of thing. And it's one of the most intimidating things I've ever done. So you're walking down this thing. It has 50 cells each side. Maximum security, you're in your own cell. So while you're in your cell, you're quite safe. 50 inmates, 50 cells each side, and you're walking down, and there's all these people glaring at you. I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Eventually they put me in my cell, super strict, not allowed to talk. You're in a prison and maximum security, not allowed to talk to anyone. If you did try talking, they'll come, they'll do this to you. That means kind of stop. Sleeping on a concrete floor, you've got a little sort of grass mat and 3 blankets. And the 3 blankets, you can put 2 on top, 1 on the bottom, which I did the first night, and my knees and hips were quite sore. So in the end, I put 2 on the bottom. The concrete was cold. The food was shit. Every meal, they called it miso soup, but it's like boiled cabbage. Tiny amount of protein, like maybe a little bit. Thursday night, right, the superintendent, on the first day, he took me under his wing a little bit, I think, and he knew my background. Anyway, he took great pleasure. So Thursday night is chicken curry night. I think you like chicken curry. Chicken curry arrives on Thursday night, and I'm sort of, bit of gristle. I put that aside, and there's another bit of gristle. At the end, it's all gristle. There's no chicken meat. It's just gristle. And what they do is they have a deal with the restaurants, where the restaurants, when they're chopping up whatever they're making with chicken, the gristle gets put aside for the prison food. There was, so I complained to one of the guards. This is still early days in prison. I complained to one of the guards, it's not chicken curry, it's fucking gristle curry. And, then I get in trouble. You're not allowed to do that. I think they were a little bit lenient with me at the start over things like that. But I saw a few guys get messed up by the guards. And after that, Japanese, they don't mess around in that prison, eh? That was probably the worst thing I saw. This is when it's no longer a joke. It was the first day in the shower. So Monday and Thursday are shower days. And when I say shower, they have 4 showers here and 4 baths. You go in initially and the guards tell you to take your clothes off. They'll then tell you to go and jump under the shower. The shower's like this far off the ground, so you've got to sort of kneel down and sort of wash yourself. And then the guard would tell you when you've done enough showering, and then if the other guys are out of the bath, you're allowed to jump in the bath. So anyway, I go in there and the guard, take your clothes off. And I don't really know what's happening, but I see the other 3 guys taking the clothes, so I take my clothes off. There's a big sumo guy standing 2 along from me, playing with himself. I'm thinking, kind of new to Japanese prison. Anyway, so he's sitting there, and I could see people were a little bit on edge, but what goes on in prison? Anyway, then the guards, they indicate for these other 4 inmates to get out of their baths. Next thing, this sumo guy yells. He grabs this, what was a kid, I think an 18-year-old kid, grabs him, collapses him to the ground, smacks him 4 or 5 times in the head, and then starts trying to fuck him. And sort of within about 2 seconds, one of the guards, they have an alarm thing on their belt. He presses this alarm, and so I hear this beep, 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 and the place goes in lockdown. So you hear all of the locks. Everything is now locked. And there's this team of 25 guys who was like this reactionary force to come and deal with whatever problem. The 2 guards have stepped back with pepper spray, not pepper spraying the big sumo guy who's busy trying to root this 18-year-old kid, but sort of, and so all of it, here's this little wee Kiwi boy, he's like, what the hell am I doing here? So I just backed against the wall, want nothing to do with any of this. Took about 90 seconds, and I hear this chung, 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 chung. Door gets flung open, swarm of guards come in, tasered the guys on the floor, dragged them out. It's like, holy shit, this is when it's dawning on me, what am I doing here? Horrible place. That was the worst thing that I saw. But that ward, it was like a who's who of Japanese criminality. There was a guy who had raped and murdered something like 13 prostitutes. Next to him was a guy he'd gone on some drunken samurai sword thing and killed 4 people in a night with a sword. There was another guy, this was super interesting. Many years ago, there was a sarin gas poisoning in the Tokyo subway. The head guy of that, his court case is still ongoing. And that was like 15 or 20 years earlier. And what happens in Japan, if you plead not guilty, and it's a very sophisticated case, you refuse to cooperate, the court case can take, in some cases, decades. And the reason the inmates do it, this guy's going to be found guilty. There was so much evidence that he was the ringleader of the sarin gas poisoning. He's going to get genuine life. He's never getting out. The remand facility is better than the hard labour. As soon as he's convicted, he's going to do hard labour. So here's this guy who's been in there for, I don't know the time, but probably 15, 20 years. His court case is still ongoing. And what happens every month, it takes them 3 or 4 months to establish who he is. They come in, they sit for 5 or 10 minutes. Oh, we've got his passport here, we've fingerprinted him, okay, but, we need a little bit more. So the court case system there, it kind of revolves around confessions. If you confess to your crimes, they'll be more lenient on you, and you won't have a court case that will drag out for years. So let's say you get charged with a relatively minor crime. Let's say it's burglary. Punishment for burglary might be, let's say, 2 months in prison. If you plead not guilty, your court case might take 6 months. You might as well just plead guilty. So what happens is most people will simply sign a document saying, yes, I'm guilty of that, and they do their 1 month or 2 months and out they go. And when you plead not guilty, there's an assumption in Japan that you are going to be guilty. Like if the conviction rate is over 98.5%. Very rarely there's a case where there's a gross breach in procedure is normally the only way you can get off. It's extremely rare that you argue your case and you get off. Only if there's, an example would be if they haven't read you your rights in the first place, then you get let off. And so it really revolves around confessions, and that impacted me. One of the things we'd done in Antarctica, the Japanese charged me with 5 things. Possession of a knife. I did have a knife on me. I needed it to cut the net to be able to board the boat. Disruption of business. Well, that was my job. My job was down there to stop whaling. They claimed that I'd cost them $10 million in terms of lost whaling revenues. Probably about right. Disruption of business, relatively serious crime. It's normally used for Yakuza, where they're doing extortion and stuff like that. Destruction of property. I'd cut the net to board the boat. I agree with that. Boarding a boat without permission. Yeah, I agree with that. So there's 4 convictions there that, I agree with that. No problem. The 5th one was assault. Now, what happened in Antarctica, one of the tactics that Sea Shepherd has, they would shoot rotten butter onto the whaling boats. And rotten butter is called, chemical name is butyric acid, and it smells really bad. I didn't think it was a valid technique because these are whalers. They're used to climbing in amongst whale guts and stuff. I don't think they care about a smell. But anyway, Sea Shepherd believed in the technique. I got told on this day the security vessel was getting close to the Steve Irwin. The Steve Irwin wanted to launch the helicopter. The Shonan Maru had water cannons. If a water cannon of salt water gets on the helicopter, it's grounded for the rest of the campaign and a big expense to go and service it all. So on this day, we're in the small boat, zipping around the Shonan Maru. We've had a few run-ins with them before, tried to pop foul them and a few things. So anyway, we come up. I've got my man's spud gun. I'd been using red paint on the Nishan Maru early on in the day. Today I'm going to go and shoot butyric acid up on the bridge of this boat. But what happened as we're pulling in on it, we see that the whalers, they've got a security detail around the boat with what turned out to be impulse guns. And these were developed, I think, in Israel for crowd control. They have like a scuba tank type thing on the back, pressurised, full of pepper spray. And then they've got this hose where they could do, in the space of a few seconds, you could spray a whole tennis court area and have everyone covering their eyes. So we see these guys with these big impulse guns. So I sort of knew, hey. So I said to the small boat driver, I said, we need to, if we're going to get astern of that, we need to be well astern. Otherwise, we've got to be in front of them. So there's this cat and mouse game of us in here and then cutting over the other side, and these guys running from deck to try and get us. And eventually, they got tired of this, and they fired their guns forward to try and get us. There's a breeze going this way, and the spray comes back over them, right? So now they've shot themselves with their own pepper spray. And they end up, the guys double up in pain. A short time later, I fire my bottle of rotten butter, and it smashes in the bridge. Woohoo! You know, I said, well, hey, who's the man? Butyric acid all over the place. They blamed the injuries on me. So they put out a press release that night saying, you know, the crew on the small boats they've shot and injured our crew. Here's some injuries. And they had photos of them with swollen eyes and stuff like that. You know, typical of what you get from pepper spray. Sea Shepherd then, this was filmed by Animal Planet. And you can see the guys, you know, if you watch the video, it does look like those guys shot themselves, you know. So you see the spray go up and then, you know, 3 seconds later, come on. Anyway, to cut that story off, they charged me with assault. And here I am, and my lawyers are saying that you need to just come clean on this and say that you're sorry. And I was like, I'm not saying sorry. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. And, you know, the lawyers are like, if you go up there and you just say you're innocent of all this, they said, you're probably going to get 5 years. You mentioned before 10. It wasn't 10, but my lawyers, they thought I was going to get 2 to 5 years based on the crime. And the two that was, the assault was the really serious one. The other one was the disruption of business, which was normally a Yakuza type crime. So they said, you're going to get 2 to 5 years. They said, you know, you may get 2 years if you come clean and say you're sorry. But if you go up there and you're arrogant and whatever. And so I'm sort of starting to ponder this, and eventually I basically argued in court that I didn't mean to go injuring anyone and apologising. And that's a hard thing to do when you know these muppets shot themselves. And for you to stand there and show contrition is quite difficult. But, I've done a considerable amount of time in prison now, and I just want to get out of this place. Yeah. A turning point in the case was, so around this time we're talking about what am I going to argue in the court case? I said I want to speak my mind, and so I wrote out a speech, and it was, I can't remember how many words, but quite a lot. I gave that to them, and I said I want to speak this in Japanese. I need you to teach me how to say all these words in Japanese. And very cleverly, what they did was they reworded it in very humble Japanese words. You know, Japan has a respectful way to say something and a colloquial way, like you talk to your mate. They made it very respectful. And then I spent a lot of time with one of the junior lawyers. She would sort of teach me, you know, what things meant. And she was probably the one that convinced me to go along with the just show contrition and say you're sorry. I did include some stuff about the whaling. One of the focuses I had with media, this is offensive to New Zealand and Australia. You're whaling in our backyard. And I had some terms that, a couple of words I use that resonates with Japanese about personal space. This is New Zealand and Australia's personal space. This is offensive to us. Like, we love Japanese people. We don't love your whalers that come down and whale around us each year. And that message started to resonate. It was the first time Japan started debating whaling. It became the number one story for a number of days in Japan. Whale consumption in 2010 dropped 30% in Japan. The previous year it had dropped 10%. So it was a declining industry, but it was the first time Japan had started to realise, man, this whaling is an issue and it's upsetting Kiwis and Aussies. And old Japan, they were like, oh, who cares? But young Japan were like, oh, this is an issue. You know, like Japan have a very strong sense of not wanting to be offended, but also not wanting to offend anyone. And so when they would bring up, but you're not vegan or whatever, I steered clear of that. I just said, look, this offends Kiwis and Aussies. I tried to keep out of all the rest of the debates about it, but this offends Kiwis and Aussies. We like you guys. So in the court case, that was my main argument over why I did it, was because this is offensive to New Zealand Australians and we care very, very deeply about it. And I'm not the last person that will come to Japan as a prisoner. So I had that in the speech, but then there was they'd worded it very carefully where if I injured someone, I'm extremely sorry, and unreservedly I apologise to these men. And that was hard, given that these three guys are sitting over there and they've all testified. What do you think should happen to Captain Bethune? He should be punished to the maximum letter of the law, when I know they've killed, when they've injured themselves. However, I knew when I'm looking at 5 years in prison, I knew I had to do a good job on that. And so I probably spent about a month rehearsing it.
What else did you have to do?
Yeah, nothing else to do. Yeah. And so in the end, I spoke for 12 minutes in Japanese. And I'm not, in no way was I fluent. I just memorised it by rote. I memorised, bakuhatsu kario uchiko mereti chio nagash nagara shindakimasu. I sort of knew what that meant, but if you asked me to rearrange the words in another way that makes sense, I had no idea. And when I got out, the Japanese, they ran the story. This is super impressive. This guy is fluent Japanese, despite being in a prison where you're not allowed to speak. And again, I go back to that point. There was a softening towards me, and they started to run the story. This is offending New Zealand Australians. We had no idea. And when I got out after that day, the guards start talking to me in Japanese, thinking I'm fluent Japanese. Like Scotchy means like a small amount, But it was one of the best things I did there. And in the end, in sentencing, so sentencing happened a month later. And when they're reading out the sentence, I've got a translator who was very good. So I hear, as they're going through the thing, he's sentenced to 2 years hard labour. I'm like, surely not. 2 years. And I'm not saying anything, but then they're still talking. And then about 5 minutes later, it comes through, his sentence is suspended for 5 years. So it means if I commit any crime in Japan over the next 5 years, I've got to do 2 years hard labour in Japan. But basically I'm free to go. So then there's another half hour of rambling around, which I don't really remember. And then my lawyers come and say, hey, Pete, you're free to go. And then about a minute later, immigration come and arrest me. So now I'm arrested under their immigration laws because theoretically I'm in Japan illegally. And I was like, come on, guys, you got to be kidding me. And so from there I got sent. So I'd been in the Tokyo Detention Centre in the max security ward, which is a very difficult place. They sent me to an immigration detention centre, which is like a holiday camp. There's a computer there with internet. There's a Coke vending machine. What do you want for dinner? There's a series of menus there. They had on the top floor, they had a soccer pitch with a sort of wire net so choppers couldn't come and pluck people out. So I went up there. There was only 2 other inmates there from Africa. And so I talked to the guards, let's go and have a game of soccer. The World Cup was on the time, actually, World Cup soccer. It was when New Zealand, we were the only team that went through the World Cup undefeated. So the Japanese were, you're New Zealand, very good in soccer. I was like, not really, but, we got a few draws along the way. So we'd go up and play soccer. I remember it was the start of me kind of feeling free again. I knew it was only a matter of days that I was going to be going back to New Zealand. Super happy days when you've spent a long time in prison, wondering what you're doing there, and hey, it's for the greater good. But I'm sick of this miso soup and all the rest of it. Yeah,
it's the uncertainty of not knowing what your future holds, which would kill you. We've been going for over 2 hours. I'm going to have to wrap up soon because we get another booking, but. We've just talked about the water stuff. We haven't even got to the where are we at now? Like 2010, 2011.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes. How long are you in New Zealand for? I don't want to wait another year to get the rest of the butane story.
I've got. In fact, I might be able to do an afternoon. So I'm Coromandel this weekend. Then I'm down south chasing pigs and deer with my fiance as well, who's committed to carrying a pig out of the bush for me. Can you make it on a Sunday?
Yeah, we'll do a Sunday.
Okay, right. Sunday 2 weeks from now.
Okay, cool. Deal. Lock it in. Because I've even had to rush through some of the chapters as we're going because, there's just so many stories. Just a couple more on that jail thing. So what is that? What did you learn about yourself? 5 months, 23 hours a day, 23 and a half hours a day alone with your own thoughts.
The only time you're exposed to other inmates when the exercise yard, occasionally there was an additional person in the yard with you. Normally not with me. I was considered quite a dangerous prisoner. The irony of that, with all these Yakuza and stuff. And then the showers was the main area that the trouble happened. I was a mess when I came out. I'll tell you,
mentally and physically?
Yeah, no, mentally. Physically, I was 62 kilos. So I'm 75 now. That's kind of a healthy weight for me, 62 kilos. And I would walk 10 kilometres in my cell at night. I was determined to try and keep fit. I'm very good on one-arm press-ups. And I remember on the first couple of days on there, in those days I could do like 41 arm press-ups and I'd bank those out. I'm trying to pretend I'm a tough guy, which I'm not. I have no ambition to fight, but prison there's this definite hierarchy and the sort of very violent and tough people at the top generally don't get messed with, and then you've got old men, drug addicts and kids at the bottom. Generally no one messes with them. That kid I talked about before, he was an exception because he was a rival Yakuza clan from this guy, but generally no one messes with him. The middle's where all the trouble happens. So I'm pretending I'm this tough guy, but they've no ambition of wanting to fight. But prison is a learning curve of just trying to get by. Most people in there, I just want to do my time and get out of here, and I was certainly in that camp. However, when I got out, I had no money. So Sea Shepherd had stopped paying me. I didn't know it. Sharon, to her credit, didn't want to bother me with it. But I get it. She says, Pete, there's no money in the account. Like, everything is gone. And so I called up that sponsor I mentioned before, Bobo, who sponsored the party in Valencia. I said, Bobo, can you send me some money? He was like, how much do you need? I said, if you could send us 10 grand would be a great help. He sent 10 grand. I go down to the bank on the Monday. The money's not there. And I remember saying to this teller, the money's fucking there. You got my fucking money. I want my fucking money. And this, poor 20-year-old, she's turning the screen around. There's like $3.85 in my account. And I remember looking at her, and I lost the plot. I remember looking at her wondering, can I reach over and grab her by the throat? And then the manager comes out. This is back then, they didn't even have security guards in the bank. The manager comes out. He knew who I was. He said, oh, Mr. Bethune, I think we should take this outside. I was like, oh, fuck you. So I go outside. I walk down the road and I go to a little coffee shop, which in those days was kind of my favourite coffee shop in Browns Bay. I go in this coffee shop and I sit down and they had a little wee old style couch. I sit in this couch and look up at the board. Cappuccino's $4 and I got $3.85 in my account. And this lady comes up and she was like, hey Pete, she says, I see you've had a few adventures lately. Yeah. She says, what can I get you? I said, I see a cappuccino, $3.85. I said, $4. I've only got $3.85 in my account. And she looks, she says, hang on. So she goes out, the manager comes out, and he says, Pete will shout you. And then they bring me out a big piece of carrot cake as well. And it was as I calmed down, I started to think, there's something wrong with me now. And what happened for a period of about 6 months, little wee things would trip me over the edge. Like for me to think about throttling that poor girl behind the thing, that's not me. But I was close to it. And a number of times, especially in that first kind of month, I would lose the plot over minor things. And it was a mild form of PTSD. And it took me a while to get that out of my system. And what's happened out the other end of it, I've become a lot more tolerant now. Like, it takes a lot to upset me now. And I think Japan, it changed me in some ways. And for that period of time, I was an angry little bugger, and small things that you would think normally, why would you be upset over that? You know, the 10 grand, it's not my account today, it'll be there tomorrow or the next day. Like, you know, why are you even thinking such things? So, but I think I managed to get on top of it. And in some ways, when I look back on Japan, I paid quite a heavy price for that.
Hugely.
It was the right thing to do, you know.
So how do you rebuild after that?
Concentrated on getting fit. So I went and stayed with my sister, had a place out in Waitakere, so concentrated on sort of my health, you know, put weight back on, got a bit of muscle mass back again. And then now there's this time. So my relationship with Sea Shepherd had soured. So then there's what do you want to do now? And, you know, by now conservation is in my blood. I'm not going to be with Sea Shepherd anymore. How do I make a difference in conservation? And that kind of became, as a kind of, I mentioned before about at the end of Earthrace, the blue pill or the red pill. But, okay, you've got the record, what do you do now? It became, I'm going to go to Antarctica and try and stop Japanese whaling. That chapter's now finished. What do you want to do now? And that's where I made the decision. I'm going to do conservation. And I, you know, at that time I didn't know if I could even make a career of it. But I'm going to have a go at conservation, and that's where I had the idea to do a TV show. The Animal Planet episode, when I boarded the Shonan Maru, became the highest rating episode in Animal Planet history at the time, and that gave me the idea. I'm going to hire a bunch of former Spec Ops guys and do conservation missions and film it and make a television show out of it. Yeah, and so that was, you know, the start of a new chapter. And
this sort of where you made the transition from sea to land.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Which, and we'll talk about this in when we catch up next for the next part of the interview. But I think a lot of New Zealanders would be shocked and surprised about, you know, some of the stuff that you've seen and you've done and the animals you're dealing with.
Yeah, well, I guess my life is not the typical Kiwi's life. In the early days, maybe, but when I made that transition to be involved in conservation, I didn't want to, you know, a lot of people in conservation, it's about sort of waving banners and doing protests or whatever. I did that with Sea Shepherd, but I felt like I needed to do more. And when I went out and we filmed that television show, The Operatives, you know, we did a lot of cool stuff. And, you know, we were successful in quite a few missions, a lot of failures. One of the things in conservation, the hardest thing is how do you fund your work? Like if you take, like Dom Harvey, you make a product that people listen to, and that's how you get funded. 99% of the world's population, you serve people one way or the other. You've got clients somewhere. Conservation, whales, dolphins, turtles, a jungle, they have no money. And that's a real that's why conservation remains one of the hardest careers you can take. Your clients have no money. So somehow you need to monetize your work. And so I did that initially through the television show. Okay, I'm going to make a television show that people will watch. In the end, I think we pulled in maybe $4 or $5 million through the television show. That kept me funded for, 4 or 5 years. And through that, it allowed me to establish myself as a conservationist, especially on the fisheries side. You know, I've become, quite respected in terms of legal fishing and what we do there. And then loved the jungle stuff, started doing work in different jungles around the world on conservation missions. I love my time in the jungle. I love my time.
This will be in part 2. We can talk in detail about the snake bite, saving like tiger cubs and baby monkeys and all sorts of stuff. Which I think I think we're probably quite sheltered here in New Zealand.
Yeah. Also, in New Zealand, Department of Conservation handle our conservation estates. We have a few animals that are sought after overseas. So there's the guy down in Dunedin where he's photographed all of those little wee skinks that live on the Otago Peninsula. There's a lot of them have been smuggled out to Germany. He's photographed them all, and he has a database of them. So there's a bit of smuggling of birds out of New Zealand too. We've got a huge number of critically endangered birds. So there's an industry in that, but it's relatively small. You go to parts of Africa, parts of Asia, parts of Central and South America, wildlife smuggling and the poaching of wildlife is massive. And it's one of the reasons I dedicate a chunk of my life now to working as best as I can with my team in terms of helping park rangers that are trying to address it.
You're 60 now. Are you
61 on Saturday.
61? Oh, really?
Yeah, I have my birthday 10 minutes before my brother.
Oh, mate. Yeah. Are you slowing down or not? No? Do you have any plans to eventually move back to New Zealand and
it's a
sit
good
on
question.
a rocking chair?
One of the things with conservation, there's a good track record of conservationists who can continue doing it till the day they die. They might, for example, the jungle patrols in Corcovado, it is like mountains. There will come a time when I'm no longer able to keep up with the top ranges. I haven't hit it yet, but when I do, the boats and stuff, I'm good at boat operations and I'm good at running small teams. So there'll be a transition where, maybe I'll get into writing books as well and stuff like that. But I'll remain in conservation, I think. It's where my heart is. And I never do a day's work at the moment. Even I have tough days. I've got a patrol actually coming up in a couple of weeks. I think I've got 8 days in a row in Corcovado. That is mountains, and they are the toughest patrols in all of Costa Rica. But I love those days. I never work a day at the moment. I'm just doing what I believe in, and I love every day that I get to do it. I'm changing a little bit at the moment. I got engaged a few months back to a super awesome lady, and we're busy trying to figure out how we merge our two lives together. She's got a couple of young kids. She's a yoga instructor, and so we just held a yoga retreat on our boat as a fundraiser. So my life will transition a little bit. How can we sort of merge our two lives together? But in terms of me working on conservation, I think I'll keep doing it. But there will come a time where I'm no longer fit enough to go in the jungle. I do have, on the boat, I've got a good focus on fitness, and I love spanking young crew who come on the boat, and we'll put them through, burpees and calisthenics and CrossFit and stuff like that. And it's pretty rare I get someone who can beat me, but that'll probably change in a few years. I got one guy on the boat at the moment, Mikey, who I think he's about to beat me on the rowing machine. So, and he's gradually gotten better. Something like a rowing machine, there's a fair bit of technique involved. So there's the odd crew that comes and beat me, but at the moment I still do pretty well. But that'll slow down sooner or later. However, there's plenty of other stuff in conservation for me to be involved in.
Mate, for a little boy from Hamilton, it's been a wild life. It's been crazy. Do you ever have moments of pause or reflection to think about the life you could have had?
No.
You must have had moments like that in that Japanese cell.
Yeah, that's true. Japanese prison was tough on me, especially the last month. What actually happened? I mentioned before about the cyanide and the bow and arrow. Sea Shepherd dishonestly booted me out of the organisation before sentencing, so I still had another month in prison. And that kind of broke me. And that period, I remember thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? I paid a heavy price in Japan. When I look back now, it was the right thing to do. But at the time, I remember thinking it was wrong for me to board the Shonan Maru. I could have been back in New Zealand leading an easy life. However, go back and sell washing machines or, I took the blue pill. Can't go and do that, eh?
Yeah.
Once you take that blue pill, it's a one-way street.
Well, Pete Bethune, we'll leave it for now. We'll park it for now. This has been crazy, and to think that we've only got the water part of the story. We're not on land yet. How is it for you reflecting on some of this stuff? There's some crunchy stuff there.
Proud of what I've done.
Yeah, are you?
Proud of what. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I've been so blessed to lead this life. I look at many, Schlumberger for me. I don't regret that. But then after Schlumberger, over that period where I was doing automation projects, my life was sort of largely indifferent. We did a few cool projects and that, but once I started down this conservation route, super proud of what I've done.
Yeah.
And it is a great adventure. I've patrolled, I've been through every ocean on Earth. I've patrolled a lot of the great waterways on Earth. Gulf of Dulce, where we do a lot of work at the moment, one of the greatest waterways anywhere on the planet. I've been patrolled in some of the greatest jungles in Central America and Asia, done work in Africa. I've lived the dream. And in a single year, I would have more adventure than most people have in a lifetime.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So you walk down the street, Ponsonby Road this morning. Does anyone in New Zealand recognise you anymore?
Occasionally, not very often.
You've been
now.
out of the news here for a while.
Yeah. In fact, I deliberately keep a low profile now. A lot of our work in Central America, we're arresting, or we're part of the team that is arresting what are poor people, and I don't want to. I'm wary about having the profile of that in the public domain. Also, it's the park rangers and the Coast Guard. If they want to go promoting something that we're involved in, it's them taking the glory. And I'm very conscious, I don't want to be perceived as the white hero stepping in. We're supporting park rangers and at times Coast Guard or Air Naval in Panama. We're just supporting these guys. And so I'm very careful not to go posting much. So I don't do any media these days. I post a little bit on Instagram, but we tend to post just the positive stuff. So we've got a beach cleanup, 120 volunteers on the beach in Corcovado in a month's time. We did a salvage job of a patrol boat that got wrecked on Kanyu Island. We built a story about that. We've got a lot of... We take scientists out to the thermal dome offshore from Nicaragua. We've got a lot of sort of positive stories that don't have that hard edge of you going and arresting people doing illegal activities. So we do promote that a little bit, but I don't do much social media anymore outside of those positive stories. Pete Bethune is, arrested another poor fisherman in Costa Rica. Not a great story in terms of public domain. I've got a role to play in that, and I don't like illegal fishing by fishermen. I don't like wildlife poaching. But when you meet these people, they're poor people feeding a family and trying to get by. So I've got sympathy for them. I don't want to be perceived as that angry white guy out chasing around poor people. So I tread a very fine line on that. And most of the media that comes out is the Coast Guard or the park rangers. They'll do it, and we're not part of that story. So when my ship turns up, a lot of the people in Costa Rica, they think it's a DEA boat, which I don't mind them thinking that. They're not going to come and mess with us. But a lot of people haven't made that connection of what we do, because it's either in the jungle and I'm just some jungle guy with helping out, or if it's offshore, it's normally in the small boats or the patrol boats of the Coast Guard. So I keep a very low profile on that, and I'm quite happy with that. In terms of funding, most of my funding is from foundations and that, and I keep them informed of what we're doing.
Well, with that in mind, I appreciate you doing the podcast, and I'm hoping we can reschedule this for another couple of weeks.
Let me email you. I'll have a look at my schedule, but I'm pretty sure on the Sunday before I fly out, I'm here for the afternoon. So if you can get your team in on a Sunday afternoon, and
mate, I'll be keen if you are. But assuming that doesn't happen, thank you so much for today.
Pleasure, mate. Yeah, thanks heaps.
Mate, you're a great New Zealander. It's fascinating. All right, Pete Bethune, part 1.
Part 1, yeah.
Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks for having us on.